Okay. Is everything working now? Wow, bumped the hell out of my mic there like a fucking idiot. Okay. Ugh. Do. Is everything working right? Let me get some notifications sent out here. Um. Let's see. Where the hell is... There. Let's see. Okay. I think I got everything sent out. Let me get some coffee mixed. Oh, we'll get this road on the show. Hopefully everything's working correctly. Let's see here. Uh, yeah, looks like everything's working. Once more. Okay, we'll get this started momentarily. Hello, Scott. Hope you're doing well. I was inches away from canceling today's stream because of Twitch's bullshit today. Um, inches away. I actually posted a ping about it in my Discord for a moment, and then I was like, wait a minute, it just now started working. As soon as I posted that today was going to be canceled, it started working just fine. But all this morning, it was just muted. What do you mean muted? Muted? What's muted? What do you mean muted? Wait a minute. Why can't I hear myself? Oh. I'm just say hi. Oh, that's why I can't hear myself. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Flip between Discord and here. Yeah. But I hope you guys are doing well. Today's gonna be something different. Gonna be a more relaxed stream. You probably noticed I do have most sound alert type things disabled. So just because it'd be really difficult to read with those popping off and whatnot. I'll be playing VRC in order beats to have a decent day. Oh, yes, about that. Again, a reminder to everybody. Next Saturday, we're going to have our VRC community hangout stream, so if you'd like to join in with that, we're just going to be hanging out some worlds, maybe play a couple games and stuff. I'd like to meet and greet all you wonderful people. And VRC is completely free to play. You do not need a headset at all. It works just fine without one. I'd love to see you guys there. So there's more information on that in the Discord. So yeah. 100% getting on that. Yeah, and I think you already have me added as a friend, so we already got that cleared up. I'll be basically inviting everyone on my friends list that I know was interested, I guess, when the time comes. But yeah, but anyways, that aside, let's get this show on the road. Now, something I'm going to be doing, like every couple of chapters, I'm going to be taking a short break of sorts to give my voice a little bit of a time to catch up, so I don't get lightheaded because reading aloud can make me drone on a bit. So we're gonna be taking a couple short breaks throughout, and I'll also be catching up on chat on that time because I won't be able to go back and forth constantly between chat and the book without breaking up story consistency. So get yourselves a nice blanket, a nice cup of something hot, and let's get going. All right, this is my first book, Chasing the Dawn. I really need to update that cover art. It is pretty bad. Can I friend request you on VRC? You already have me added as a friend, you bonehead. I remember I sent you a VRC friend request a long time ago, but you didn't realize it until much later. That was funny. Let's see. Anyways. So we got chapters here. We have Over 30 chapters, yes. Alright, prologue of A War Without End. The universe, an infinite sea of darkness where all life began, where all life would end. Cold, inhospitable, and unforgiving. It was a miracle that life could exist here at all. More than all the stars in their galaxies bringing light and warmth as an affront to the limitless void, life shined on in defiance against a reality most brutal, for it was within life that a different kind of life shined. This was the light of hope, and within some life was more than light, there was also spirit. Like the brightest burning stars were formed of little more than gravity and cosmic gas in the black sea of void, matter and chemical bonds formed in the seas of planets near and far. They combined and consumed, unified and devoured, giving birth to a kind of primordial struggle defining all that existed in the realm of the physical. But life was not alone. Indeed, like a farmer sows his seeds, the seeds of all existence was sown by one whose name given to him by mortals were many. In one particular corner of the universe, he was simply known as the Creator. The great, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent All. It was the Creator who fathered all things, both light and dark. Both three in one, penance, zeal, and faith, his existence was unlike any other. It was through him the universe was created. Through him the seeds of life were sown, and through him the only salvation from the darkness could be found. Indeed, though he may have been perfect, and though everything creative may have reflected himself in some way, it was because they reflected him that they sometimes found means to defy him. It was a blessing and the curse of free will, a gift first to his holy stewards, the angels, but even more to his most favored creations, mortals. Both of the universe and the heavens alike, the flesh of beast and with soul of light, mortals were the ultimate pinnacle of the Creator's love. Like children to him rather than servants, the universe was their gift, and each of them were unique in their own way. In all shapes and sizes, evolved from many different backgrounds, these mortals arose in spite of the darkness like the first stars bursting a light in the icy primordial universe. However, the Creator's work did not stop there, for with free will came freedom of choice, and with choice came consequence. Without choice or consequence, the freedom bestowed upon mortals could not exist, and thus out of necessity arose other beings. In the shadows of reality, permeating like a vile plague both within and without the universe, the dark creatures manifested. First of these were the demons, formed of dark just as angels were formed of light, the two eternal enemies of each other before the universe even began, until the Creator sealed the demons away in a tormenting prison reflecting their own bitter souls at the height of the celestial wars. Sheol, Abaddon, Damnation, Gehenna, Hades, Hell. Many names it was called, but all led to the same miserable conclusion. It was here demons were sealed away for a time, severed from heaven, but that was not the end of their reign of sin. With the creation of the universe, a realm of light and dark, a realm of true free will, demons and other dark cosmic entities found a new way to resurface, through the feeble hearts and limited minds of mortals whose free will they envied so bitterly. Since the very first mortals stood upright and looked to the sky with sentient minds questioning their existence, demons have been there, tempting them with illusions, lies, and whispers to their ignorant minds. The demons poisoned their souls, dragging the deceived into madness, despair, and ruin. Almost as soon as their conception came to be, mortals were already stained and damned by their own choosing to follow that which their small minds concluded. Hello, Flygon. Time and time again, civilization after civilization, everything that mortals created, no matter what species they were, nor where in the universe they hailed from, it was always imperfect, and that which was imperfect would always fall. It was through their fall and ruin that demons found their gateway into the universe via the tainted, ignorant will of mortals, every sin being like a summon to yet another of their many myriads. Left to their own devices, mortals were doomed from the start. Too small were they to reach up to the Creator's glory for aid, and too weak were they to build a bridge across the darkness to him. All seemed lost as soon as it began. But what seemed was not always what was. Hope for mortals was not lost entirely, just as free will necessitated a potential choice for darkness, it necessitated a choice for light. Like the Creator once fought alongside his angels in the celestial wars, so too would he fight alongside mortals in this new war. However, this conflict was different than the celestial wars, for the universe was not pure spirit, neither purely physical, but both, and he would have to fight on both these fronts. To accomplish this, the Creator chose a select few mortal species to serve as the harbingers for his plans to see all that he created come to fruition. These species were thus dubbed upon the holy tongues of angels to prophets far and wide as the Sacred Seven. It was the Sacred Seven who were chosen out of the most corrupted mortals in dire need for salvation, each of them once embodying a deadly sin to its fullest: greed, lust, wrath, envy, gluttony, um, sloth, and pride. Sorry about that. The sin from which all others descended, thus a sin infecting all of the seven. As with all things under his wings of justice, the last were made first, the lowest were brought high, thus his hand extended to these seven species to bring them into grace. And it was through one of these species which he would send forth his heavenly will and lead all mortal kind who wished it to their salvation. This species, having its origins outside of the borders of a small spiral galaxy, were known as the Clepathians. Having upright plantigrade bipeds of charcoal black fur evolved from large predatory rats. Upon each hand were four long claw-like digits. Upon their large flat feet were three claw-like toes. Their heads were spherical, sporting a short snout covered in white fur, two large downward slit pupil eyes resting above it, and on either side of their heads two massive triangular ears. A long prehensile tail extending from the base of their spine completed them. True to their nature as evolving from predators, they had the instincts and adaptations of hunters, thus their early history was one wrought with murder and bloodlust. However, through the careful and subtle guidance of the Creator, they were to be turned from hunters thirsting for the blood of one another to warriors of light in both body and spirit. Over many millions of years, through war after war, the rise and fall of nations small and grand, the Clepathians were hammered into shape. Pride tempted them into bloodlust, but time and time again they arose from the ashes and rebuilt anew. History repeated itself even well into the era where Clepathians left their homeworld, bombarded by nuclear war, and branched out to what they called the Blazing Sun Galaxy. Wherever they tread, war followed with them by their own pride, lending them to conquest. If not the alien species they eventually eradicated from their own galaxy, then conquest of themselves. Galactic empires arose and fell, well after the last non-Clepathian to show themselves in the galaxy was driven extinct by Clepathian oppression, bleeding themselves over the unquenchable altar of their own sins. However, that all began to change at the hands of one by the name of Lacta Felthmore, when their galaxy was invaded in what the Clepathians know today as the primordial conflicts. For the first time in thousands of years, the Clepathians found themselves united again under this extragalactic threat, driving them nearly to extinction. But they survived, brought to their knees and humbled, but they survived victorious. From the ashes of that war, a new nation uniting all Clepathians, the United Clepathian Systems, was founded, and for a time there was peace. This peace came to be known as the Era of Silence. Yet, mortals being, as mortals were, limited in their senses and mind, this silence was only physical. Even as they no longer drew their blades against one another in the name of banners and borders, new wars were fought within them. The animosity between them grew and grew, though not through violence, but through clever and serpentine exploitation. The new kings of the Clepathians were not warlords but the greedy, selling their wares of vice and decadence in this prosperous era, turning what was a hard-bought reward into an endless fountain of corruption. Faith and virtues once held by many Clepathians dwindled, replaced by materialism and carnal lusts. A new kind of suffering festered, like a cancer spreading over thousands of years. It was not long until nearly all of their ancient history, all the magic and wisdom of the past, and all that their ancestors fought for was but a hazy, distant memory. All of this truth forgotten through ignorance or corrupted by vanity. Now, 25,000 years after its foundation, the UCS had become an empire of wealth and vice, a shell of its noble foundations. Many would have called it the highest it had ever been, but some would have called it the lowest the Clepathians had ever sunk. These latter individuals were few, longing for the days of old, but only a tiny few remembered the truth of the past. Only a tiny few knew the true source of this illness, this faithlessness which rotted them from the inside out. These few who saw the sickness and decay within the UCS, whether they were blinded by nostalgic lies or knew the real truth of the past, understood that it was only a matter of time before a breaking point was reached. When that would happen, no one knew. But what they did know was that it would not happen on its own. It would take someone of great ambition, great courage, and great influence to bring about such a revolution. be it for better or worse. Regardless of either outcome, regardless of what future these shrewd few desired, all of them could agree on one thing: it would not be peaceful. History would repeat itself indeed, for no amount of mortal blood seemed to sate the altar of war, but in this reality not all blood was mortal. Not all hope was lost, for indeed the Creator was full of infinite power and infinite mystery. Alright, that's the prologue. Establishing some groundwork here. Take a sip of coffee. Okay, Part 1. End of an Era. Chapter 1 of Part 1. We'll take a look at this picture here. So I remember doing this a long while back as well. I really need to update these pictures. These are ancient. That'll give some hints as to what's going to be happening here. So Chapter 1. Love Lost. The gentle winter night served as a stark contrast to the fiery anxiety and adrenaline within the small, brightly lit hospital room upon the Clopathian homeworld of Chelor. It was here, at the heart of the UCS, where the miracle of life was soon to begin for them, a gift for each other from one another. For hours now, without sleep, Skyreath Felthmore awaited by his wife's side in nervous jitters as she had gone into labor. For her, this was a night of anticipation, but for him, it was a night of fear. Skyreath sat on a chair near a curtained window, his mind racing in worry of what was soon to come at any minute now. He looked to one of the nurses in the room with him, cloaked in sterile white scrubs and pulling stretchy latex gloves over her clawed forefinger hands. "How long?" Skyreath asked for the 10th time this night with shivering voice as if he were outside in the snow. "Trust me, you'll know," said the nurse, trying to reassure him, but to no avail as his bare-clawed foot tapped quickly against the floor. "Skyreath, honey," his wife, Lolian Felthmore, whimpered to him in strain, her hand held tightly in his. "We're gonna do it. We're gonna be a family." She smiled warmly at him with eyes filled with pain of labor. Stiffening his lip, Skyreath nodded at her. "That's right, the three of us, you, me, and our little boy," he said. But Lolian looked away and towards the nurse. She knew she spoke false hope, but she wished to do all she could to alleviate the fear radiating from Skyreath. They both knew the risk in having a child, especially with her condition, and they tried so desperately to chance fate. The chances, however, were not in her favor. Skyreath stood up and paced over to the nurse, speaking quietly to her at the table where she prepared for what was soon to come. "Is there anything you can do? Anything at all?" he pleaded. The nurse took a deep breath and sighed, her large fuzzy ears slumping as she shook her head. She looked Skyreath in the eyes and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We're going to do everything we can, but you knew the risk. The artery walls around her heart are too thin, and the intensity of what she's about to go through has a 93% chance of rupturing them." "What about surgical methods? Can't you just pull the baby out like that or something?" Skyreath asked, voice quivering in desperation. "We can't do that because Clopathian blood coagulates too quickly, leading to blockage without blood thinners, and because of her thin artery walls, she can't have blood thinners," she sighed. Again, looking down at her tools, clearly under much pressure as well. "If the baby is to survive, there's a significant chance your wife won't make it first, Senator." Skyreath placed his hand over his mouth, looking down and around his shoulder, back at his groaning wife. The nurse spoke again. "The doctor will be here in a moment with his team, and they'll do the best they can. Best thing he could do now is be with her, speaking as a mother myself." All Skyreath could do was nod and heed the nurse's words. He sat back down by his wife, leaning towards her and keeping his hand over hers as to comfort her. How terribly ironic it was, he thought, that despite all the power he supposedly had as first senator, he was entirely powerless now. Then again, ever since being elected into his position, he had come to learn where the power of the UCS truly lied, in the hands of the most fortunate and wealthy. If only things had been different, he wondered. If only had more control over things than being bound by the whims of the highest bidder, then maybe the likes of what was now happening to his wife would have never happened. The UCS was a mistake, at least in its current form, Skyreath believed, and now he suffered personally from budget cuts to medical research. His ears perked up at the sound of the door opening, all three doctors in sterile gowns entering the room. They spoke quietly with the nurse about preparations, and all Skyreath's wife could do was stare at them with a sense of foreboding dread. Her death drew near. However, Lolian chose to do this. All her life she was told she'd never bear children because of her rare genetic condition, but she hoped she could prove them wrong, even if only for a few seconds. She could feel the time coming closer now, like an aura shared by a tether of lifelong love. Skyreath could feel it too. indicated by the beeping sound of the heart monitor. Their son's time to enter this world drew nearer and nearer. Only seconds remained now. Sweat beaded on her brow, and her breathing suddenly grew rapid. Ah! It's coming! She let out a sudden whimpering yelp. Immediately, the nurse and 4 doctors sprang into action. The calm before the storm had faded, and now came the wind and rain as Skyreath's wife gripped his hand with tremendous force. She strained and struggled, pushing as hard as she could with her teeth gritted and claws tearing into the bedding at her side. Come on, keep at it, Skyreath urged, standing up as the tension, anticipation, anxiety, and hope all lanced through his heart at once, tearing it this way and that. Feeling a terrible pain in her chest, Lillian gasped and quivered in a series of relaxed and tense pulses. A doctor noticed this and prepped a needle filled with a drug in mere seconds. 20 cc's of dilaticositine. Dilaticositine. Oh, yeah. Give me 35 psychozymin. Yeah, psychozymin. I have to remember those. He shouted, and another doctor immediately rushed to aid him in countering the damage being wrought around the heart of Skyreath's wife from her own blood pressure. The nurses spoke up from the lower end of the bed. He's almost here. I can see his head. I can't do it, she whimpered with tears of pain welling in her eyes. Yes, we can. Come on, Skyreath urged against her doubts. The nurse spoke up again, holding up 3 fingers. Stay with us. It's almost over. On the count of 1. 3, 2, 1. Push! Skyreath's wife pushed with great force, but it was enough. Again. 3, 2, 1. Push! Letting out a loud growl, Lillian pushed even harder. 1 more time. 3, 2, 1. Push! Commanded the nurse. With a shrieking scream towards the ceiling, squeezing Skyreath's hand so hard she nearly broke the bones within it, she gave every ounce of strength she had until she could finally hear a sound she thought she'd never find so sweeter than now. Chills raced down Skyreath's spine as he also heard the sound of a high-pitched crying and wailing. The surreal sound of their newborn son. Skyreath could feel his wife's hand relax, but they held each other's as they looked into one another's eyes with overwhelming joy. He could barely believe it. You did it! Skyreath exclaimed in admiring disbelief. His wife shook her head weakly. No, we did it. After the doctors and nurse took care of the necessary procedures immediately following the birth of a Carpathian, the nurse delivered the swaddled baby into the arms of his mother. She held him close as Skyreath leaned in to take a look at his son, knowing that from this day forth he was more than a husband, but also a father. Look at him. He's got his daddy's eyes, smiled Lillian as she looked into her son's green eyes. And definitely your ear stripes. Skyreath laughed, albeit with great exhaustion. She laughed as well, but they shared this she laughed as well as they shared this beautiful moment. The nurse, holding a pen and clipboard with the child's birth certificate, approached them. Excuse me, sir and ma'am, do you have a name in mind for him? Asked the nurse. Lillian looked to Skyreath expectantly. Well, me? What about you? Skyreath asked. Lillian stared at Skyreath, her smile fading as she gulped and blinked. Her pupils seemed to narrow and dilate slightly. Something was wrong. Because he's your son, said Lillian. The fur on Skyreath's neck stood on end at his wife's chilling words. Honey? Lillian? Skyreath blinked, not wanting to believe what he knew what was happening. What's wrong? Lillian began to breathe deep, gasping breaths. Immediately, the doctors in the room moved in to fight against her body's self-destruction. With shivering cold hands, she handed her son over to Skyreath as the baby started to cry and the sudden panic filling the room. Skyreath held him close, staring Lillian in the eyes with utter horror as he saw their whites turn to a pale yellow. Lillian? Lillian! He shouted as he stood up, but the doctors crowded themselves around the table, blocking him off, passing medications and equipment back and forth to each other as his own son wailed in infantile tears, as if he too knew what was happening. And then, almost as soon as it started, it ended. The sound of the shouting doctors was silenced and replaced by the shrill tone of a steady, flat line of the heart monitor, the Grim Reaper's cadence. With their heads bowed and eyes mourning, the doctors stepped aside for Skyreath to see the body of Lillian. He stepped forward and gasped, looking down at her where she laid. Even in death, she seemed so beautiful and serene. But it was this night which showed to Skyreath that both ugly and beautiful were all the same to death. Skyreath closed his eyes and started to whimper, a single tear falling from his face onto Lillian's gown. He couldn't look at her any longer, not like this, and so he turned away and faced the curtained window. From around its edges near the windowsill, he could still see the snow falling outside in the winter night. Beautiful, yet so very cold and dead. Already started to question whether it was worth it to lose the one he loved for another, But when he looked down into the now calmed and cooing infant's eyes, he knew it was what she would want. But how could he do it alone? To be not just one parent, but two, and that wasn't even considering the pressures of his career. It was also daunting, but he had no choice now. Sorrow hybridized with anger to forge a deep, powerful emotion within Skywreath: determination. He looked back to Lillian's body with a furrowed brow and stiffened lip, his tail flexing in slow, controlled sways left and right. No more, he thought. No more would he let himself and so many others suffer from the greed bleeding through every vein of the UCS like it did now. Had it not been for greed, then places such as hospitals would not be so under-equipped and lacking resources for research. Had it not been for greed, then perhaps his wife would still live, he thought. From this day forward, however, he decided he had reached his limit. Skywraith thought back to the legends of an individual who brought peace to the Clepathians and founded the UCS, being a hero forged from trying flames, tearing down the old and corrupt forms of rule. It was only a legend. Its basis, in fact, highly disputed by modern historians, and its tale twisted this way and that, but it served an inspiration for him, for it was the legend which his family line descended from some 25,000 years ago. For a time, Skywreath hoped he could bring about a change through playing subtly and by the rules, but if the legend of the old was to be believed, then perhaps Skywreath would have to take them down by a more direct force, just as he had. Perhaps it was time for the UCS to finally go, and for something greater to rise from its ashes. Perhaps it was time to bring back the days of an empire, that which was dead could never return, Skywreath thought, but perhaps it could have a successor, and he would need a successor. Sir, First Senator, the nurse broke his thoughts. Skywreath looked over his shoulder at her with glossy, teary eyes. I am terribly sorry, but we still need a name for your son, she said. Skywreath now knew just the name for the one cradled in his arms, his pride, his joy, his hope. What Skywreath would set in motion would hopefully be what his son carried onward, for what was a throne without an heir? His son's name would be the one Skywreath was always inspired by, for when he looked into those large green eyes, he knew there was something about him destined for greatness. Already, without so much a deed to his son's name, he could feel the call of pride. Lacta. His name will be Lacta. The nurse nodded and wrote the name down. All right. We'll give you 3. A moment. I'll tell the staff not to disturb the room. Thank you, nurse. Skywreath nodded, keeping his back turned towards her, hiding his tear-stained face. When the nurse left, Skywreath sat down next to where Lolian laid, so still and peaceful. Already Lacta had fallen asleep in his arms, and now he was alone in silence. He pushed the curtains aside slightly, looking outside the window to see the blue and black banner of the UCS gently flowing in the wind. He stared at it for a few minutes, and the more he stared, the more anger gradually arose within him. Skywreath became restless, standing with his son still in his arms and his eyes still focused on that ancient banner. He always did want to bring back the hierarchical system of rule from an older time, a time when those under the banner of the Clepathian Empire lived for purpose greater than themselves, for their land, for their traditions, for their pride not just who they were, but in what they were together. Principle would not help him. Faith would not help him any more than it helped Lillian. No, only he could help them, because now, as he looked to his left at his wife, he was alone. All his hopes now resided on him, perhaps even more than him, his son sleeping loudly in his arms. Lacta, he whispered, you will do great things that I never could. I know it. Okay, that was chapter 1. Hello, Geth. Sorry I didn't say hello earlier, but I did see you. Given that this is a live reading, there will be occasional stutters and slip-ups. Apologies for them, but that's just how it do be. Alright, again, like every couple chapters, I'll be taking a short break so I don't get lightheaded here. Alright. Chapter 2. Budding Under a Shadow. 6 years passed since Lacta's birth, and for a time, things were looking up for Skywreath and his son once Skywreath finally came to terms with Lillian's passing. However, sometimes it didn't feel like he moved on at all. Rather, that time ticked ahead and left him behind. By now, Lacta grew old enough to walk, speak, and understand the spoken words of those around him, at least as best as a 6-year-old Clepathian could. Even 6 years from his birth, Skywreath would still tell Locta so much about his mother. Though he never knew her, Locta too wished she was still around. Locta didn't mind his father's rambling, for Skywreath still loved him, and Locta felt the same for him. That was all that mattered to Locta, at least for now. Life for Locta was different than most young Carpathians. Being under the care of a single parent was rare as is. His father never once caught interest in another. Locta, in all his innocence, believed it was because Skywreath was so preoccupied at the time. He knew his dad was a busy man with an important job and never questioned it. For Locta, this lacking attention was normal, for he knew life no other way. Fortunately, Carpathians were not overly dependent on the care of their parents once they could walk and speak. The small amount of their instincts held over from their ancient ancestors gave them a kind of natural ability to provide basic needs for themselves, even at an early age. But even so, a small child like 6-year-old Locta couldn't be left entirely alone. Leaving them unattended for around up to 4 hours was considered dangerous, and poor for their mental development. Locta was often left alone for 10. Not all was so bad, however. He and his father lived in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood only a few miles from the large dome-shaped capital where his father worked. The most ancient building on Chelor still painted in a gleaming royal black. Not even the flying sky cars with their blaring engines through the city's aerial skyways could be heard. It was a neighborhood for governing officials, thus a no-fly zone, and one of the few truly crime-free parts of Chelor, or this whole blazing sun galaxy for that matter. Not all, the only noise was the occasional freighter starship breaking through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, but otherwise there wasn't much to disturb the peace. Life was quiet for Locta, but he didn't mind. He was too young, too naive to care either way. Oh my goodness! Oh, thank you so much for the raid, Chuddy. Welcome in everybody. My name is Locta. I stream from Wednesday to Sunday. Do art on Wednesdays, various things throughout the week. We're trying something very new today, where I'm reading book 1 of the Eternal Crusade Continuum, the first of my books, live on stream. So get yourself something nice and cozy here, and yeah, or get yourself something hot to drink and get a blanket or something and enjoy yourselves. I need this stream, yes. And for those who missed it earlier, this VOD will be published, and I will be exporting this VOD to a YouTube channel. It's going to be one of the VODs that will stay up for eternity, I guess. I'll be doing this with future reading VODs if I decide to continue with this, but we'll see how it goes. But, oh, hell, hi, kittens, good to see you. But hope you had fun chatting away over there on Chuddy B's stream. Hope you had some nice, fun conversations. Hello, Ghost. Good to see you. I'll be taking a break. Again, if I miss chat, I'll be taking a break every chapter to catch up on chat. So, please forgive me if I don't read your message right away. But anyways, let's get this road on the show. Let's see. Not always so bad, however. His father lived in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood only a few miles from the large dome. I already read that. It was neighborhood government officials. The only noise was the occasional freighter starship breaking through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, but otherwise there wasn't much to disturb the peace. Life was quiet for Locta, but he didn't mind. He was too young, too naive to care either way. Skywreath always did make up for the time when he came home, spending almost every minute of every hour with Locta until it was bedtime. He taught Locta many things, including a personal hobby of his own that he once shared before becoming so busy, smithing. Almost every solid metal object within the house, from cups to dishware to holonet transmitter antennas and many things in between, were made by Skywreath and Locta. With Skywreath spending so much time at work, Locta was taught that it was up to him to keep things running at home, and he adapted quickly. It wasn't like he had a choice in the matter, neither the faculties to yet question it. However, being the child that he was, he often used the forge behind the house for his own enjoyment, creating his own figurines and toys to play with. Skywreath often beamed with pride at how well and readily he caught on to the craft, and so he didn't mind Locta using some extra metal to make his own bits and bobs. To Locta, or any outside observer, things were peaceful, and life was good, but Skywreath shared not his son's innocent ignorance. It was nearing the end of spring, and Locta was to start at the new school year soon. Kindergarten was simple enough, but with Locta being 6 years old, by this time he should have matured enough to start growing styluses. More than just natural defensive arm blades which could extend and retract from slits on the underside of a Carpathian's forearms, styluses were a part of their identity. No two of them looked alike, aside from being silver or gold, being made of their rapidly coagulated metallic blood ejected from these slits. The slits would usually appear around 5 years of age, and by the time they were 6, small, blunted proto-styluses should have appeared. Locta, however, had no such styluses growing, nor the slits under his forearms. Skyreath and Locta's doctors thought he may have just been a little late to develop them at first, but now it worried Skyreath. With the new school year right around the corner, Skyreath feared the worst for him, being seen as an outcast among his peers. A few of the kids in his class had already begun bullying him because he was so shy, and Skyreath knew he only had himself to blame for Locta's self-kept nature. Then again, a few other kids were shy as well, so it wasn't unique to him. Skyreath often tried to reassure himself. Not growing styluses was unique, and with uniqueness came the risk of being made an outcast. With being an outcast came bitterness and self-defeat. Skyreath would not have his son be a failure. Not like him. Hoping to do something about it, the late summer checkup reports were due soon for all children prior to the new school year, and it was on one summer day when Skyreath left work early and made way for home. Locta was inside the house, sitting at the dining table as he colored a picture when his large, fuzzy ears heard the telltale whine of a plasma drive turboshaft engine from a ground car outside. He put down his coloring utensils and hopped down from the chair, standing eagerly on his clawed toes to peek out the dining room window. His eyes widened and tail whipped with joy as he recognized the gleaming metal vehicle as his father's. The oddity of his dad being home so early didn't even cross his mind as he made haste to the front door and opened it just in time to see his father approaching from the car. "You're home early!" Nocta exclaimed. Skyreath approached his son with a warm smile. "Decided to take the rest of the day off and spend it with my number one. Come on, hop in the car." He waved his arm for Locta to follow him, and without hesitation, Locta joined him. The sliding door to their home automatically closed and locked with a slight hiss. Walking down the path through the yard to the hovering car parked parallel to the curb, Skyreath spoke to his son. "You did take a bath today, right?" He leaned over and sniffed Locta's right ear. "Mm-hmm." Locta nodded and wiped his nose. "Don't lie to me." Skyreath peered at him with a slight smirk. "Remember what I told you. Not being clean makes the clothes mean." Locta finished the rhyme with a roll of his eyes. "I know, Dad." An adult Carpathian kept clean more out of prevention of illness and warding off unpleasant odors that came with maturity, for their fur was stiff, almost needle-like to where uncomfortable clothing was usually not a problem. A Carpathian child who did not keep up with their hygiene, however, would find clothing uncomfortable as their softer fur would cling to the fabric and stiffen in odd ways. This was especially true for the typical Carpathian garments children wore. Layers of fabric wrapped snug around their arms, legs, and tail, with an outer layer of an upper tunic and a kind of skirt or kilt around their waist. It was worn by both boys and girls, as Carpathians on the outside were neither in both sexes at the same time until puberty. The only way to tell male or female apart was internally via genetics or careful look at their skeletal structure. Before a technologically advanced era like that Locta and Skyreath lived in now, this often led to great confusion on how to raise a child, thus resulting in a kind of neutrality regarding their young. Some of these ancient traditions, like the clothing Locta and other kids his age wore, still remain today, even if they were a bit restrictive when it came to things like climbing into a car hovering a foot off the ground. Locta struggled to pull himself into the passenger seat of the car, but managed to do so with enough squirming of his legs finally catching the claws of his foot on the step rail. Skyreath, sitting in the driver's seat, reached over Locta on the other side of the cab, pulling and fastening a seatbelt over his son before securing his own. Locta pulled his door shut as Skyreath closed his, and Skyreath then eased on the accelerator, driving them down the street. "Where are we going?" Locta asked Skyreath with a grunt as he pulled his tail out from under him and let it poke through a hole in the rear of the seat, far more comfortable than sitting on it. Skyreath drove the car to a stop at an intersection, checking the street for other passing vehicles as he spoke. "School starts soon, and they need a physical checkup for you." "Checkup? We're going to the doctor?" Locta frowned in disappointment at Skyreath. "That's right," nodded Skyreath as he made a right turn onto a larger highway. Locta groaned at the news. "Aw, I don't want to go to the doctor." He folded his arms and pouted. "Why not? Don't you want to see Dr. Relson?" Skyreath questioned him teasingly. "No!" Locta whined with his arms still folded, looking away. "It's so boring. Why can't I just go home and play?" Skyreath took a deep breath and sighed. "Because you're my little man, and part of being a man is..." He trailed off for a moment as he glanced uncomfortably at the UCS flagpole near a museum, sighing as they drove past. "Sometimes doing things you don't like." "Like how you don't like your work?" Locta questioned bluntly. Skyreath looked at him with mild shock in his eyes and ears perked high, the question catching him off guard. "What? Who told you I didn't like where I worked?" Locta shrugged. "I don't know. You just talk a lot on the phone sometimes in the off." at the office and stuff with Skirthy and your other friends. Oh yeah, when can Skirthy come over again? He's funny, he chuckled innocently. Skyreath, however, looked back on the road before him and gulped, blinking and raising his brow. He always heard kids could be clever little devils, but Locta drawing such an accurate conclusions from a conversation spoken in code speak caught him off guard. Locta's perception was almost uncanny, dangerously so if he could discern what Skyreath was truly saying. He only hoped that his venting of frustrations at the office was the only thing Locta picked up, and not the finer details of what Skyreath spoke of. Dad? Locta broke Skyreath's thoughts, noticing the silence. Huh? Oh, Skirthy won't be coming over anytime soon. Maybe the holidays, but we'll see, said Skyreath. Locta seemed disappointed, but he understood. Is he busy too? Yep, we all are. Skyreath nodded as they turned another corner. With his shoulders and large fuzzy ears slumping as his arms folded, Locta looked out the window and sighed dismally. Skyreath frowned at himself, feeling guilty for saddening Locta. He looked at his son and spoke gently. Hey, when we're done with your checkup, let's say we make a stop on the way home and pick up some ice cream. Together, just you and me. Gradually, a smile crept over Locta's face. He looked back at Skyreath. You mean it? Yeah, you can get any flavor you like, Skyreath nodded. Okay, and maybe go to the park? Please? Locta tapped his fingers together. Skyreath looked at the digital clock on the dashboard of the car. If we have time before sundown, sure. He nodded, rubbing Locta's head. Woohoo! Locta cheered, with his fists in the air. Skyreath and Locta soon made it to the local hospital, pulling into its large parking lot out front. Turning off the car and unbuckling them both, Skyreath stepped out of the vehicle, with Locta hopping out afterwards. With Locta's hand firm in his, Skyreath navigated across the parking lot and into the entrance of the hospital's pediatric wing. They walked through the wide, polished, and sterile interior, approaching the front desk. Locta caught the attention of the receptionist. Here for an in-summer checkup appointment for Locta Felthmore, birthday 25022, 30th of Frost Moon. The receptionist typed at her computer, searching through the database. After finding the appointment, she grabbed a disposable ID band and handed it to Skyreath, who placed the band around the tip of Locta's right ear. Skyreath then led him into the elevator at his right, where they ascended into one of Locta's least favorite places in the whole Blazing Sun galaxy, the waiting room. It was there they found a seat among many other parents and children also waiting an end summer checkup, and even Skyreath found himself sighing with impatience at the mere sight of how many patients there were. They were going to be there for quite a while. While they waited, Skyreath recognized that some of the other children were. Hold on a minute. While they waited, Skyreath recognized that some of the other children here were those from Locta's kindergarten class. They were playing a kind of hand game in the middle of the room, but he saw Locta completely avoided looking at them. Skyreath nudged Locta slightly with his elbow. Hey, don't you know them? He asked, just above a whisper. Locta whispered back, reluctance in his tone as his eyes shifted towards them. Yeah? Why don't you go talk to him? Skyreath suggested. Locta's slip-pupiled eyes flicked left and right, scanning the room nervously before leaning even closer to his father and whispering quieter. 'Cause I don't like them. They're mean. Mean? I thought they were your friends. Skyreath whispered back, tilting his head in confusion. Locta looked down and said nothing, but it was clear by how he leaned closer on Skyreath's arm and sat back in his chair that he wanted nothing to do with them. Skyreath had hoped Locta would have made friends with the other kids he met in school by this time, but already it seemed Locta was becoming somewhat of a loner. Such a personality was far from ideal if Skyreath were to have his own dreams for his son fulfilled. But there was only so much Skyreath could do with how busy he was, incessantly stamping and signing papers, traveling all over the galaxy from meeting to meeting, satisfying economic demands of massive corporations holding the UCS by the throat, while saying what he could to prevent civil unrest. Even if he could be home for him more often, there was still the matter regarding Locta's condition. Lullian had a rare genetic defect in the lining of her arteries, Skyreath remembered, but Locta had something far more bizarre. Skyreath wondered if Locta's lactobacillus was related to it, and soon he would find out when Locta's name was finally called up into the office after nearly an hour of waiting. Skyreath stood up with Locta following him as they approached the doctor standing in the doorway with his clipboard and white scrubs. There he is, the little first senator himself. Haven't seen you in a while, said the doctor with a warm smile down at Locta. Shyly, Locta hid behind Skyreath, peeking out from behind his leg at the doctor. Skyreath smirked and looked down at him. It's just Dr. Relton, buddy. You know him. Quit being so shy. Still, Locke hid away from him, his tail coiled close to his back. Skyreath shrugged and rolled his eyes. All right, Doc, lead the way. Take a sip here. Dr. Reltson nodded and led them down a short hallway into his office. He closed the door behind him, instructing Locke to sit on a kind of high-up padded bench. Climbing a stool, Locke sat upon it while Skyreath sat on a chair in the corner. Dr. Reltson almost immediately began to look him over, listening to his breathing, checking his blood pressure, and looking into his eyes. Any sort of illness in the past 60 days? A few weeks ago, he had a really bad stomachache for a couple days, but otherwise nothing, said Skyreath. Reltson nodded and wrote it down on his clipboard in barely decipherable handwriting. I see. Any sort of allergies, long-term sneezing fits, pale spots on the fur and claws, runny nose, or the like? He poked at Locke's tiny black nose at the front of his short snout. No, nothing, said Skyreath. The doctor nodded and continued his exam, moving on to the large, long claws of Locke's hands and feet. They were perfectly healthy, a clean white in color, and smooth with no sign of discoloration or wear. But then the doctor took Locke's arms and looked at the underside of his forearms. He blinked twice and stared at the young Locke's arms for a moment. Huh, that's not right. He looked at Skyreath. Still doesn't have a styluses. By now, at least the slit should have appeared. I was actually going to ask you about that, said Skyreath, worry veiled only thinly in his tone as he sat with arms folded and his right leg shaking nervously. What's it mean for him? Can something be done to fix it? Steroid or something to make it grow? He shrugged. Relson took a deep breath and sighed, rubbing his chin as he pondered. Locke just sat and listened, unsure of what to make of the conversation as the doctor spoke to his father. In a unique case like this, I can't say for sure. You see, our styluses are made up of solidified blood, being that our blood has a large percentage of metal within it, allowing it to take on a kind of blade or barb shape. The brain sends signals to a special set of nerves in the ulna bone of the forearm, which tells blood to excrete all except metallic structure, as well as the ulnar arterial muscles to constrict, as to direct the flow of blood through the stylus slits, explained the doctor to both Skyreath and Locke. Locke's blood is different, as we both know. I wonder if perhaps that has a connection. Different is an understatement, muttered Skyreath, shifting in discomfort. When's the last time you've seen anyone with blood as black as obsidian? Dr. Reltson nodded. I know. However, the differences aren't merely superficial discoloring as we thought. He looked at Locke. Locke, have you been experiencing any kind of pain or discomfort in your arms? Locke shook his head and shrugged his shoulders. Nope. None? The doctor considered it as he rubbed his chin. So it's not as simple as a failure to develop stylus slits. Here, I have an idea. He snapped his fingers as he walked over to the other side of the office and opened a cabinet. He pulled out a small device looking somewhat like a bulky, long camera with a black screen. He powered it on and stepped back over to Locke. Hold your arms out flat, palms down. You won't feel a thing, don't worry, he reassured the doctor as Locke seemed squeamish about the strange device. Slowly, he held out his arms. The doctor held the device over them, clicking a button over both of them. Now turn your hands over, palms up, said the doctor, and Locke complied before the doctor repeated it. Afterwards, he turned the device off and looked to Skyreath. I'm going to speak to my colleagues about my findings. Findings? What's wrong with him? Skyreath stammered worriedly as he stood up. Don't know yet, but with his data and the blood samples from the last checkup, we might be able to find out what makes your son so unique, said Reltson. I wouldn't worry about it too much. If he's not feeling any kind of pain or malaise or displaying any sort of odd behavior, then it may not be anything to worry about for his long-term health. It might just be a purely benign mutation. I'll call you later when we determine what we're looking at. Until then, he looked at Locke with a smile. You're as fit as a fiddle and ready to go. Locke smiled in relief and jumped down, ready to get out of this boring place. Skyreath, however, was not as sunny as Locke was, for now he was stricken with a new worry. What if it meant something even greater than merely not having styluses? What if it proved some proto-stages of a new, horrible terminal disease? What if it wasn't? Even if it wasn't, Locke may have to go all his life as a genetic freak of nature. Nauseating anxiety spread itself through him. Nauseating anxiety speared itself through him, all the while he and Locke made their way out of the hospital. Being worry-stricken about his son's health was the last thing he needed at a time like this, when the pressure upon him was high and only built higher by the day. All his hopes and dreams for the future resided on Locke, for he was more than just his offspring. He was Skyreath's legacy. One day, Skyreath planned that Locke would replace him when his goals were finally set into motion. if they ever were set into motion. He and Locke stepped back into the car and drove towards the town where an ice cream shop was. As he gazed upon the people and places all around within the filthy urban sprawl, his stomach churned at all his once proud and united people had become. He darkened the tint on the passenger side window so that Locke could not see out of it, daring not to soil such innocence by exposing him to what lay outside. The streets of the town were littered with trash in more ways than one: prostitutes, drug junkies, virtual reality addicts, all the ranges of degenerate underworld types in between among the waste-littered roads and alleys. Recreational drug and alcohol stores could be found within less than a mile between them, and like crowning jewels of sin to all that were endless pal Oh, and like crowning jewels of sin to all that were endless parlors of avarice and dens of lust, casinos, stripper clubs, adult shops, and towers of large businesses that controlled them all. Such were the fruits of those spoiled by all the liberties bought with sacrifices of their ancestors. Without hard times, without struggle, there was no need for principles and strength to uphold them. Thus, the people of the UCS slowly rotted and decayed over its 25,000 years' existence into something barely more than animals. If only their ancestors could see it today, Skyrie thought with a heavy heart. The very same people that conquered the whole galaxy, clawing its way out of near extinction twice. The indomitable Copathians, reduced to this filth. They died founding this nation under noble ideals of liberty, equality, and lasting peace, but their sacrifices only brought a new kind of slavery. Skyreath remained quiet the whole way, driving slowly with traffic as to not attract attention. Aside from the very rare areas like the neighborhood they lived in, this was the whole of the UCS. Be it Cello or any other world in the galaxy, such societal was everywhere he looked. But that wasn't the worst. The worst was just how many accepted it and didn't mind it, and how it was sold wholesale to line the pockets of those who knew how to exploit these weak, demoralized, and sick people. What was sold and advertised as good was taken as it was without question, as shown by the many neon signs and holograms they drove past, all of them promoting and broadcasting paid lies Skyreath knew was untrue. But with so many marching along to its tune, speaking out against it was a surefire way to defame and make a fool out of oneself before all the others who paid to have others think for them. Their whole lives nothing more than a replaying of what they watched on a holovision channel. He longed for what it was. He longed for what it was said to be like in the older days thousands of years ago, where people acted not for themselves but for their country, rallied behind a leader they could aspire to follow. Though he tried so hard to shield Locta from the reality they lived in, it was impossible to do so. Locta did not show it nor tell his father, but he had already seen it. But like his father, he found it all so unpleasant, yet for different reasons. He couldn't quite understand why. He was faintly, yet inherently averse to what he saw, but he was far too young to try and question it now. When he was older, wiser, perhaps he would search himself, for now all that he cared about was spending time with his dad and getting some delicious ice cream. They soon pulled into the ice cream parlor's drive-through window, ordered their cones, and then Skyreath proceeded to drive homeward. Locke noticed the route they were taking, having somewhat caught onto the way around this area of inner city, and frowned as he put the pieces together in his mind. But, the park's the other way, he protested with his ice cream-covered lips. Skyreath, with one hand on the wheel and the other on his cone, nodded at the clock display. It's too late. Sun's gonna be down by the time we get there. Besides, you have preliminary orientation tomorrow. Your class is starting a week. Aw, I hate preliminary. Locke struggled to say the word, Skyreath being unable to help himself from laughing. Whatever, I don't want to go to school. Stop laughing, complained Locke. Skyreath gently scolded him. Don't you cop an attitude with me, mister. You're going to a preliminary so you can meet your teachers and classmates before the year starts, he stated. Why are you so grumpy? Last year you were so excited to go to school. What changed? I thought it would be fun, like you said, but all the kids are so mean to me, Locke pounded. They keep pushing me and make fun of me. What? Locke, why didn't you tell me? Skyreath questioned. Locke grumbled. Because you're never home, and when you are, I just want to have fun. I just want to get away from it. Skyreath took a deep breath and sighed, letting a moment of silence pass before Locke spoke again. I don't want to go to school. Not anymore, he said with his voice starting to waver, followed by that telltale sniffling and whimpering Skyreath had come to know as Locke's crying. Just like the blood in his veins ran black, so did the tears in his eyes, the water from the ducts pigmented with the same obsidian-like substance coloring his blood, much like any other Clepathian's tears would be gold or silver-tinted. Skyreath, Locke, Skywreath tried to get his attention, but already Locta was in tears. Locta, listen to me. Locta wiped his eyes and looked up at Skywreath. Remember what I said earlier? Asked Skywreath. Remember what I said that sometimes you have to do things you don't want to? Mm-hmm. Locta nodded with a dismal sob. Well, even though that's true, that doesn't mean you should let yourself be pushed around. It's a difficult balance, but you can't let yourself get run over. You gotta stand up for those. You gotta stand up to those who want to put you down, and stand for those who need you. Understand? Skywreath explained carefully, trying not to confuse Locta. Locta took a deep breath and sighed. I guess, he mumbled unenthusiastically, looking out the window and away from his father. Skywreath understood that Locta was only 6, yet he couldn't help but feel a kind of regretful disappointment, more so in himself than Locta. Was he already losing the great heir to his legacy he wished to have? It was too early to tell, but all signs so far pointed to an answer he not only feared, but hated. Now, however, he had to be careful about his feelings, for Locta already proved himself more perceptive than Skywreath anticipated. Though it was nearing sunset over Inner City, Locta noticed Skywreath seeming to drive slowly, taking a slight detour down a small side road they rarely traveled. Locta recognized the road and knew the real reason why they couldn't go to the park. Feeling betrayed, yet silenced by his father's previous scolding, he said nothing as Skywreath pulled the car over to the edge of a street near a dark windowed house. Locking the parking brake, he unbuckled himself. Wait here and lock the doors. I'll be right back, Skywreath said before opening his door and shutting it, followed by Locta locking it. He watched as Skywreath approached the house, but did not enter through the front door, disappearing around behind it. Locta sighed to himself, alone in the car with his cheek resting on his palm as he leaned on his elbow. It wasn't the first time his father made this stop, and probably wouldn't be the last, but it was a stop Locta had grown to despise. He always took too long for Locta's undeveloped sense of patience, and when asked about it, his father never gave a clear answer. All he ever said was he was talking with some friends, but who were they? Why couldn't Locta go with him as well? Sometimes it seemed that Skywreath didn't even want to spend time with him, always so frazzled and preoccupied over his work, always cursing and spitting out of pent-up frustration when he was in another room. He worried about him, but he was too afraid to talk about it for fear of his father getting mad at him. So Locta just wanted to have fun and be happy at his age, but his father always told him that he was too young to understand some things that grown-ups do. Maybe it was true, but it would hardly sated Locta's confusion. What worried him even more was that he heard from the doctor early was what he heard from the doctor earlier. Was something wrong with him? Was that why Skywreath was so upset? Was it his fault? He remembered in kindergarten when the other kids could get scrapes on their knees and elbows, they'd bleed a kind of liquid gold or silver color, but when Locta stumbled and fell after playing rough, he bled a kind of inky black the other kids thought was gross and terrifying. It was the first time the condition of his was discovered, but after running blood tests, the doctor said nothing seemed wrong, just odd. Odd. An odd life. An odd child. An odd father. For a time, things were looking up, but it soon became apparent to Locta that when one looks up all the time, they'll be blinded by the sun, unable to see the reality around them. Locta had held his chin up high for quite some time, but with school yet again around the corner, he started to look down and see things for what they were once again, things other kids didn't even think about. He already had his first tiny taste of how cruel and merciless life could be in these times, and he already felt it was more than enough. But life was not done with him. No, he had much to learn about just how dark and vile the galaxy, the whole universe, truly was. Tired now, as the sun set on the horizon, the young Locta drifted to sleep, unaware of the meaning behind his perception, unaware of what kind of life lied before him. All right, that was chapter 2. Taking a sip here, taking a deep breath, so I don't get lightheaded. Single pops? Yeah. In chapter 1, Locta's mother dies at birth due to a genetic condition, or dies at his birth due to a genetic condition. Again, the VOD will be up, and I will be exporting it to YouTube as well. Single Pops, who also works in a high government position, who's very fucking busy and overstressed and hates the nation he works for, and there's just a shitload on his shoulders. Chapter 3, Defective. Hey, get up! Locke heard the words pierce through the black numbness of his slumber, but his body craved the warm comfort of his bed and quilt. He groaned and rolled over, but unfortunately sleep was not his to hold in this early morning. Locke, get up! It's time for school! Skyreath once again exclaimed, shaking Locke's shoulder. Locke blinked his tired eyes and slowly arose as his father flicked on the bright light in his room. Confused, he rubbed his eyes and looked around. How did I get here? He questioned. Skyreath responded, sifting through Locke's pack to make sure everything was in place. You were asleep when I got back to the car. Decided not to wake you up, so I just carried you inside and put you in bed. Oh. Locke considered with a yawn, still remembering the previous day as he rubbed his eyes. This day, however, would be different. As he stood up and stretched, he looked at the blinded window and saw that it was still in the dark hours of the morning as no sun poured through. Get your clothes together and get in the shower. I'll pack your lunch, Skyreath said. The bus will be here in an hour, so hurry up. Locke nodded, walking on the carpeted floor to his wooden dresser. Even in upper middle or high class houses, carpeting was still a necessity, as Clepathian's claws wrought havoc on hard, polished surfaces. Rarely, if ever, did a Clepathian wear footwear of any kind, as it was either uncomfortable, too bulky, or even disorienting to move around freely in. Likewise, all Clepathian had to retrieve was a clean tunic, a set of wraps, and a kilt. Though in different colors or patterns, he'd wear the same style of clothing every day until around the age of 12 or 13, when boys, becoming young men, would receive their silvery tail caps as a kind of rite of passage to manhood. With his garments retrieved, he walked out of his room and down the hall into the bathroom where he showered, brushed his fur, and clothed himself before heading out into the living room where his pack was already prepared and awaiting him on the couch. He picked it up and slid straps over his shoulders, and then herded his father into the room as well. Ready? Asked Skyreath. With a pack on his back, Locke just nodded, not saying anything before his father took his hand and led him outside into the dark, cool summer morning, where twinkling stars and the twin moons still shined overhead. Crickets still cricked, but in the distance one could hear the faint sound of distant sky cars screeching through the air. The city never slept, even in areas of curfew, but fortunately Inner City was one of the calmer areas of population within it. It was Northern City, which was a massive urban sprawl of mile-high towers and flashing lights, between a dazzling display betraying the darkness of crime lords and cartels in its lower districts, making the most decadent places of Inner City look like holy temples in comparison. Soon, there was a new sound entering the air from the left, a roaring, thrumming engine accompanied by a bright flash of light descending through the sky like a comet. After Locke's eyes adjusted to its headlights, he saw that it was the aerial school bus, being like a large, somewhat bulky tube with dihedral delta wings sweeping back along its hull. The door opened with a hiss, and he looked up inside to see the bus pilot waiting on him. Locke looked up at his father, who nodded down at him before letting go of his hand and allowing Locke to walk up and into the bus. After finding a vacant seat, he sat down and looked out the window at his father, who was already walking over to his own car, not even having the time to wave goodbye, for his work started soon. A knot tied in Locke's gut as the bus closed its doors, knowing that he was leaving the sanctuary and blissful peace of home behind for the next several hours. For the next year. Fortunately, not all was so bleak. As the bus made another stop and picked up another passenger to add to the 20 or so within, this one was a face Locke to recognize, and he recognized Locke's. Locke sat up and waved at him as he stepped inside. Hey, Crepto, over here! Locke grabbed his attention. Oh, hi, said Crepto, a friend of Locke's, perhaps the only one he had. Though Crepto was slightly taller and thinner, they were about the same age, having shared the same kindergarten class. Crepto walked down the aisle to his seat, sitting beside him. Ready for another year? Asked Crepto, eager to start school again. Not really, Locke shrugged with little enthusiasm. Why not? Asked Crepto with a curious tilt of his head. Locke scratched his head. I don't know. I guess I'd rather stay home. Crepto eyed him, discerning why he felt this way. Oh, don't worry. I won't let that snot-nosed butthead Scream push you around. My mom always said that my grandma said to help people when they can't help themselves. Your grandma said that? Locke asked with intrigue. Crepto nodded. Mm-hmm. My mom said she's a mystic, some kind of group of girls who hang out in rocky temples for most of their lives south of the mountain. Yuck! Can you imagine all the cooties? Locke stuck his tongue out in feigned disgust before laughing alongside Crepto. But their laughter was soon broken as they stopped at another house. Looking out the window, they saw who was standing out in front of a large, deceptively beautiful mansion. Oh, look who it is, Crepto said dismally. Scream, Locke groaned. his head lowering as his ears slumped. Scream stepped aboard the bus, but Locta and Crepto refusing to make eye contact with their heads stuck low. Scream walked through the aisles with a kind of snobbish arrogance on his face, and as he passed by where Crepto and Locta sat, he paused. Well, what do we got here? Son of the first senator himself and his little white knight. He bore a smug grin. Father says I should only use my styluses when needed, but I think I just know to. Scream! Sit down! Called back the bus pilot. Scream's eyes widened in sudden fear after being called out, then sitting in a vacant seat further behind them. Crepto giggled quietly at Scream being yelled at, but oddly enough, Locta did not. Crepto elbowed Locta. Did you see his face? Locta wasn't entirely amused, as he was. Locta rubbed his chin. You ever wonder why Scream's so angry all the time? Because he's a jerk, duh. Crepto rolled his eyes. Yeah, but... Locta looked up and over the back of the seat, looking at Scream, who sat alone, arms folded, pouting with a frown on his face. Maybe there's a reason why he's a jerk. What makes you say that? Crepto asked. Locta shrugged and shook his head. I don't know, but when I look at him, I just get a weird feeling like that. What, do you have some kind of magical superpower? Crepto mocked, making gestures with his hands like a wizard casting a spell. Get real, Locta. He's just a jerk because he knows your dad is first senator and he's jealous. Locta sighed. I guess, but why be jealous? He's not even there most of the time, Locta said bluntly. Yeah, he's gotta be like super busy being so important and stuff. I'm sure he misses you when he's at work, said Crepto as the bus flew through the air southwards towards the school building. My dad also gets busy, being in the Navy and all. Sometimes he's not there for months. At least you have a mom when he's gone, Locta said with his ears drooping as he looked out the window. Crepto said nothing, but could tell Locta was feeling down. Strangely, not even Locta truly knew why he was feeling this dreariness now. It was brought upon him by leaving home, but why it persisted, he knew not. He just felt like he was missing something. Was it his mother? Maybe, but he never knew her. Was it his father? No, for Locta knew he'd be home when he got there. What was it then? Why did he feel as if part of him were missing? He didn't know, didn't understand, but what he did know were his feelings of being deeply unsettled by it. And this was not the first time he felt it. For as long as his young mind could recall, he always had this feeling, but as he grew older, it became more and more difficult to simply ignore or distract himself from. Whatever it was, he didn't like it. The bus soon came to a halt on the landing pad next to the school building, and when the bus pilot opened the door, Locta, Crepto, and the other kids on board stood up and exited onto the landing pad. There, awaiting them, was a chaperone to guide the students to their classes. Each class had its own bus, so all who were aboard would be all those Locta would come to know, or come to fear, for the rest of the school year. The chaperone instructed them to form a line, where he then led them into the quiet morning halls of the school building, smelling of that faint, familiar, and now dreadful odor of residual cleaning chemicals Locta had come to associate with it last year. Once led to their classroom, decorated with all kinds of colorful posters and full of desks, the chaperone instructed them to find their seats. The students split up, searching for their desks as though most of them couldn't read well at this age. They could at least recognize their names upon it in Kalori, the language nearly all Carpathians spoke, save for a few remote outliers speaking older tongues. They all sat in their desks, locked somewhat towards the middle. Soon the chaperone left with the teacher's arrival. And the day began. Hello, class. I am Mrs. Crathrex, your teacher for this year, said the teacher. Hello, Mrs. Crathrex, the whole class responded, most of them sounding tired and reluctant after a summer of staying up late. The teacher smiled and nodded, flipping through her planner. Good to see you're all wide awake and ready for the day. This week is just preliminary, so we won't be going over any lessons, but we'll get to know the building, our schedule, and each other as well. Hopefully we can all be friends and make this a great year, she said with a half monotony as if reading from a script. Locta knew this tone from his father, the tone of someone who is clearly lacking enthusiasm about where they were or what they were doing. The colorful decorations on the wall were a deceiving contrast to the reality of this room. This was a room where they would be told as well as taught. The schools not only taught civil academia, but also how one should behave in society. That was what Locta feared the most. Already he had experienced this kind of attempt at brainwashing before, how oddly uncomfortable it made him for reasons he could not explain, and only passed the class because of his father's insistence on doing it just to make them happy. Even his father knew something was wrong here, but why didn't he or anyone else say something? Why was it accepted? Perhaps it was just one of those adult things he'd have to grow older to understand, Locta figured. He remembered being told about the stranger, more disturbing people of the galaxy, those once viewed as deviants for their carnal obsessions that were now forcefully taught to accept. This flew red flags and unlocked his perceptive mind. If something was good, then why did it seem so wrong still? He knew adults understood things better than he could, but he could not lie to himself about how disturbing it was to see such strange and what his father would call decadent people shown before him on a projected screen. The others didn't seem to mind, but as soon as Locke saw educational videos played to the class last year regarding these particular types of individuals, the likes of which they drove by yesterday to get ice cream, all he could feel or think was one thing: error. As he watched these errors further, the other kids around him found it enjoyable, including Krepto. All he could do was look on in writhing discomfort. He almost wanted to scream, but with the teacher and those around him all laughing and smiling, he felt as if his mouth were sewn shut. Now he was faced with yet another year of it. Grabbing groceries? Alright, Geth. Lakta, his daydreaming was suddenly interrupted. Huh? What? Lakta jumped and looked around. The teacher scribbled down on her notepad at her desk. I'll take that as a here, then, she sighed, taking attendance. Already the day was off to a great start, Lakta thought sarcastically. He hoped the rest of the day would go well, but as the hours waxed onward, his gut feeling that it wouldn't, this kind of sixth sense he was growing more and more aware of, was only proven right even more. It was nearing the end of the school hours, after lunch when he returned to the classroom, that the day took a turn for the worse. Excuse me. Lakta was walking down the hall on his own, keeping his distance from the other students as if trying to remain unseen, then suddenly felt his leg snag over someone else's. Letting out a startled yelp, he fell face first onto the floor, catching himself on his hands and knees. All around him, the other kids stopped and watched the events unfold as Lakta turned over onto his back to see none other than Scream standing over him. Did you have a nice trip? Scream mocked and laughed at his clumsiness, the other kids in the hall laughing as well in a mocking chorus. Lakta sat up on his elbows, embarrassed and humiliated. Go away, Scream. I don't want to talk to you. He tried to stand up, but Scream shoved him back down with his own foot. The other kids oohed at Scream's assertive dominance. No, I won't go away, said Scream, beginning to unwrap the cloth from his forearms. And you know what? I've been waiting all summer to test out my styluses. With a slight fluid metallic hiss, Scream extended his styluses. Being only 7 years old, they were underdeveloped, blunted and short, but still frightening enough for Lakta to see his own panicked reflection staring back at him from the silvery weapons. Scream laughed as Lakta gulped. What's the matter? Don't you want to stand up and fight? Taunted Scream. Lakta looked around at the judging stares of the other kids. I don't have styluses, he said reluctantly, his eyes lowering and shifting. What? Scream didn't believe him. Lakta grumbled, scooted backwards, and stood up. He unwrapped his arms as well, letting all see that he didn't even have the slits in his forearms. See? I don't have any. And I don't want to fight. Just leave me alone, please. His lips started to quiver, overwhelmed by the embarrassment. Scream blinked, finding it odd that Lakta did not have styluses, but then quickly got right back to his snide mockery, using the insecurity of his victim to his own advantage. Well, I suppose it'll be even easier beating you to a pulp, you little defect. The defect? The word struck Lakta like an icy dagger, causing him to take a step back with eyes wide in shock. Yeah, defect. My dad, clearly smarter than yours, told me that it means something broken and not good anymore. Just like you. Scream's verbal assassination was relentless for a 7-year-old's. The other kids in the hall started chanting along with Scream. Defect! Defect! They taunted, backing Lakta into a corner as he grabbed his ears, starting to crack under the pressure. The words crashed like falling boulders upon him. Defect! Defect! Piling on him with more and more weight until some strange force from deeply within finally came over him. His attention narrowed, the fear vanished, and he snapped up, raising his voice into a screaming shout. Well, you're just mad because your greedy dad doesn't love you and your mom's a whore! Silence suddenly ensued, the entire hallway falling into an overwhelming stillness as Scream stood there, shocked by what Lakta had said. Lakta, panting heavily as he trembled, had no idea where those words came from. He said it out of instinct, like it just came from air, but by the expression spelled across Scream's face. It was true. His words, his perceptions, were somehow true. You're just mad because you don't get any love at home, don't you? Lakta asked, his voice shaking as the words poured out of him, but Scream remained stunned in silence like a deer caught in headlights. You want to look tough, Feel like you mean something, and so you be a jerk to me because you know that I'm the son of the first senator. So if you beat me up, you think that you'll be seen as the best, huh? Scream looked left and right, frowning in despair as he then looked to his feet. Lockton continued stepping forward with this otherworldly truth pouring through him. I saw your house as we passed by. Your parents must have a lot of money, and they tried to buy things for you to make up for the time they didn't spend with you. They don't care about you, do they? He continued to speak from instinct, seeming to know more and more truth the longer he glared into Scream's eyes. Still silent, Scream stood looking at the floor as his eyes started to tear up. Lockton came closer, speaking not from his mind, neither from his heart, but from somewhere deeper. Well, hurting people doesn't make other people like you. It just hurts you too. Why don't we just forget about what happened here and try to start over? Maybe even be friends. Lockton put his hand on Scream's shoulder. I don't want to fight you. I don't want to hurt anyone. I can't hurt anyone. He finished with a glance down at his still slacking arms, speaking the last few words not just to those who could hear, but in revelation to himself. Scream felt the words sting like venom upon his bitter heart. How did Lockton know this? How did he find this out? It wasn't possible. His breathing grew deeper and quicker, and though Lockton outstretched his hand in friendship, Lockton's words only served to make Scream feel even more inadequate and weak. Insecure rage built up like a grenade and burst forth from him in a sudden screech. He shoved Lockton against the hard brick wall, tears streaming from Scream's eyes as he shouted, "Shut up!" Desperately, Lockton grabbed his arms and as Scream tried to punch him and hit him, both of them wrestling with each other, but Scream was stronger and threw Lockton to the floor. Lockton yelped out in pain, grabbing his hurt leg, but then suddenly another voice joined in. Leave him alone! It was Crepto, rushing in and grabbing Scream's leg before pulling it out from under him. A trick his military background parents showed him. Scream fell face first into the floor, and Crepto was about to deliver a fierce kick to his back before finally, after the episode had gone on for several minutes, the negligent school staff arrived and broke up the fight. They pulled Scream, Crepto, and Lockton apart from each other, and from that moment forward, throughout the year, they were all kept in separate classes. When that day finally came to a close and Lockton got onto a bus, he found that he wasn't even allowed to sit with Crepto on the ride home. As he sat down alone in a seat on the bus, Lockton wondered if he really should have said the things he did, feeling regret, but also confusion. He looked out the window and thought as the bus took off and flew them above the clouds. The words he spoke to Scream, they did not even feel like his own, but at the same time they came from his mouth. From the sense of error he felt in witnessing more disgusting people of their society to these words he spoke, it seemed like his own will was not the only thing driving him anymore. He didn't feel like as if he were possessed, but rather influenced. By what force or entity, he could not tell. There was no one else there telling him what to say, think, feel, or do. There was no being inside of him speaking for him, nor angel on his shoulder. He had laughed at Crepto's joking earlier in the morning that he had some kind of superpower, that it was foolish to think that he did, but now Lockton wasn't so dismissive of the idea that maybe there was something out there beyond sight and sound, and maybe it followed him. Rather, as he thought, it was within him. What he worried about now, however, was what he would do about it. As the bus descended through the sky and stopped in front of the house, he got off and walked along the path through the yard towards the front door. Skyreath's car was in the carport, indicating that he was home, and a sense of relief overcame his thoughts for a moment. Lockton reached up to the door control panel, anticipating his father, but then hesitated as his thoughts returned. These feelings, this force or presence, how could he explain it? What would his father say about it? Lockton frowned and sighed, knowing that Skyreath would probably just dismiss it, or say something that didn't help or make any sense. Or he might even get even more worried and stressed. Maybe it was best, from this day forward, to keep it secret, he recalled. He recalled watching a few movies with spirits and paranormal entities, and one thing that always ended poorly was when someone spoke about the ghosts, but this didn't seem like any sort of haunting. It didn't feel like he was being controlled or coerced or stalked, but rather like he was being guided and led. He was aware of it, conscious of and from it, but he could not defy it. He could not lie to it, for lying to it would be lying to himself. All right, that's chapter 3. I think this is an older version of the document because I'm noticing some things that aren't there in the published version, but it's still good enough. take a break. What are we looking at for time here? Oh yeah, we got plenty of time. I'll probably get quite far today. Let's see. Anything on chat? Get him, little dude. Crypto. Yes. This is the story where Crypto is in. All right. Huh. Chapter 4. Father of Lies. Another day, another step forward towards his goals. Skyreath forced himself to think with a rub of his temples as he sat upon his bed. Yesterday was Lochte's first day back to school, and by the look on his face when he returned home, Skyreath knew something was bothering him. Being the father he was, when something bothered his son, it bothered him too. The problem was that, for the first time since he could start speaking, Lochte refused to tell him. It wasn't like his son to keep such secrets. The worry piled onto the mountain of stress within Skyreath evermore. Skyreath wondered if he was to blame, because he too would often hide his feelings from Lochte when asked about them, and not wanting to bother him with things he was too young to understand. But maybe he did understand after all. Maybe Skyreath was underestimating him, and now Lochte was merely reflecting him. Nevertheless, there was little time to dwell on it now as he forced himself to dress and clean himself in the early crack of dawn. Once again, Skyreath went through with the same procedure he did yesterday, waking Lochte up, making sure all was ready in his bag, and packing his lunch. As he zipped Lochte's pack shut, standing in the dark kitchen alone as Lochte showered, he took a deep breath and sighed. Though he had plenty of sleep, he felt so very tired, tired in ways no amount of sleep could fix. How long could he keep this up? How much more could a single individual endure until the last line snapped? Day by day, hour by hour, he dreaded the day when he would be unable to take it anymore, but the weight just kept piling on no matter how hard he tried to shrug it off. The moment he thought he was arriving, the moment he thought he was giving everyone else all that he had to give, be it his work or his son, they demanded more. As time went on, it didn't get easier. It never got easier. With a gasp, his thoughts were suddenly broken by the sound of a house phone ringing on the counter to his right. He looked at the ID on the screen. It was from the hospital. Immediately he Immediately he picked up the mouthpiece and slid the transceiver over his ear. "Hello, this is the Felthmore household," Skyreath answered, trying not to sound as if he just woke up. "Sorry, First Senator. I hope I didn't wake you, but I thought I'd inform you about your son's condition," said the familiar voice of Dr. Reltson through the speaker. "Is this a bad time?" "No, not at all," Skyreath replied, a surge of eagerness coursing through him, hoping for some sign of relief. "What's the news?" Dr. Reltson took a deep breath and sighed. "Well, the good news is that Lochte isn't in any danger of any illnesses or foreseeable health complications. But then comes the bad news." "Go on," Skyreath gulped. "Lochte, plain and simple, does not have stilices. And he never will have them," said Reltson. "Wait, what?" Skyreath's heart sank at the idea of stilices being as much a part of Clepathians as their ears, arms, or tail. Living without them was like missing limbs, a disability, a defect. The doctor replied, "Believe me, it's not easy to tell you this, but Lochte simply doesn't have them. He doesn't have the pores in the ulnae. It's almost like he was never meant to have them at all. Not even prosthetics would help, since he doesn't even have the necessary nerves in the first place. He's quite different. Unique." Skyreath was silent, looking towards the bathroom where Lochte showered with a look of lost hope on his face and drooped ears. The doctor continued, The rest of my colleagues wish to study him further because he's unlike any other Clepathian in existing medical history, but I suppose you're probably under too much stress as is, and don't want to see him become a science experiment. It's something to consider, though. I have to go now. Take care, First Senator." The line hung up. Slowly, Skyreath took the transceiver off his ear and placed the two-piece phone back on its base, a painful numbness buzzing through his thoughts. He leaned on the counter, rubbing his forehead in grief. Day by day, it just kept getting worse. Hour by hour. He needed some kind of hope, some kind of release. But now, with his son being permanently labeled disabled in Clepathian society, guaranteed a social pariah, his dreams for future were crushed even further. The hopeful feathering of his future had suddenly turned into yet another chain around his ankles, a vice around his heart. It was as if some evil presence wrapped its hands around their entire civilization, squeezing the life out of it and choking off any hope of peaceful change. And Skyreath was growing desperate. But who was there to turn to? What escape was there from this corrupted, politicized hell the Clepathians had made for themselves? Soon, Lochte exited the bathroom, all cleaned and dressed for the day. Skyreath quickly hid his grief, replacing it with a forced smile as he handed Lochte his pack. Ready for another day? He asked Locta, who bore a slight, dismal frown after yesterday's experience. I guess. You gonna be here when I get home? Locta asked. If you weren't too busy, I'd like to learn more about forging stuff like we used to. Skyreath hesitated for a second before nodding. Of course. Yeah, I'll be there. Locta's frown arose into a little, hopeful smile. Thanks, Dad. Once again, Skyreath led Locta outside to the bus stop near the curb to see him safely aboard the large aerial school bus. As Locta sat down, Skyreath looked up and could see him through the bus window, looking back at him with a most subtle expression of fear? Betrayal? It was difficult to discern in the dark hours of the early morning, and he supposed it was a natural parent's worry, but Locta always did seem somewhat off in comparison to other kids his age. As the bus soared high and away, Skyreath was left out in front of his house alone. He went to the garage and opened the large metal door. There, he unlocked his car door, slid into its cold leather seat, and started up its engine. Plasma exhaust roared like a chorus of low brass horns from the exhaust. He sat for a moment before reversing out of the garage, wondering if he made some kind of mistake along the way with Locta, trying to decipher how to fix this boy. The questions bounced from one corner of his mind to another. Where did he go wrong? Was he to blame for who and what his son was becoming? Or was there something else to blame beyond his control? Was Locta, and therefore all his dreams, doomed from the start? Was he somehow just another burden to drown Skyreath further? Could his own son be at fault? No. Skyreath shook his head and scoffed in disgust as if spitting out the bitter, poisonous thought. Locta was only a small child. How could Skyreath possibly blame him? He scolded himself silently, with a disdainful look away from his own reflection in the car's mirrors. Alas, he put the car into reverse and pulled out onto the road. He considered that, though Locta himself may not be to blame, perhaps he was at fault in other ways beyond either of their control. Perhaps he could not ignore the reality no matter how wrong it felt. This disability of his put weight on them both, and it would never go away. Locta was like a griddle bird without feathers, or a shadowback without teeth, alive but incomplete, and ultimately it would be him who suffered the most from it. A Clepathian relied on their styluses not only for identity and for culture's sake, but also for many simple day-to-day tasks, as mundane as opening bottles to exercise or even playing sports with special tools attached to them. All of these things, and so much more, would Locta never be able to take part in, at least not without great difficulty, for styluses were as integral to living as their hands and feet. How could someone so hampered, so unlike other Clepathians, ever be seen as the proud ruler Skyreath envisioned him? How could anyone look up to a defect? On the verge of tears, he questioned himself as he drove down the road in the early hours towards the denser areas of inner city. Though it had not occurred yet, for this was only the tip of the iceberg, Skyreath knew Locta's personality would also become more and more odd and distant from his contemporaries as a result of his complication. Already he had mentioned that he didn't get along well with most other kids, and though that alone was cause for concern, it had nothing to do with his condition at the time. If it was because he was just different, acting in a way unexpected from an ordinary child, no matter how ordinary Skyreath tried to raise him. Excuse me, let me reread that. It was because he was different, acting in a way unexpected from an ordinary child, no matter how ordinary Skyreath tried to raise him. Perhaps he was to blame, at least partly, but he couldn't shoulder all the guilt. Even when he was an infant, Locta was different. It was slight, subtle, but over time it became more and more apparent and seemed to continue to grow. But Skyreath just couldn't put his finger on it. It was almost unnatural in a way, like that of a hyper-realistic wax sculpture. Uncanny, but undeniable. He was a Clepathian, but he was Skyreath's son, but at the same time, he was so alien. Now, as Skyreath drove along a highway stretch around the side of the mountain, he felt that familiar, dreadful, tight squeeze in his chest as the capital district of inner city on the horizon came into view. Another day, another several hours with mountains of paperwork, media interviews twisting his words, and this poisonous charade of diplomacy, he thought. Every day, even on weekends when most were given time to spend with their families and friends, Skyreath felt as if he were driving into hell itself, straight into the city of the damned built upon the blood and bones of their once proud ancestors. So tempting was it to just turn around and abandon it all, or, better yet, turn right and drive his car off the cliff into a fiery, lethal salvation from this torment he so stupidly persisted through. His glossed-over eyes shifted to the right towards the steep descent, shielded off only by a thin metal guardrail. And then he saw something. He blinked twice and put his furry, clawed foot on the brakes, staring at someone standing behind the rail with their back to the cliffside forest below. From beneath the simple hood of this tattered brown sackcloth robe, the figure looked up and stared at Skyreath, grinning as if he knew him. Skyreath's blood ran cold the longer he stared, but when he looked down at the clock and saw he was only 15 minutes before work started, and then looked up again, he saw that the figure was gone. An icy shiver raced down Skyreath's spine, and his fur stood on end. Was this mental and emotional fatigue finally causing him to hallucinate, or was someone really just there a few seconds ago? At this point in his life, he couldn't tell. Skyreath took a deep, trembling breath and exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He then accelerated his car once more and proceeded towards Inner City. As he came around the cliffside highway, he was met with the familiar sight of Inner City straight before him. A vast, urban sprawl with buildings of all shapes and sizes, some tall, others wide. Both on the ground and in the air, vehicles teemed and flowed like rivers of machines, ferrying their busy occupants to and from other parts of the world, or even to and from other worlds entirely. Though technologically wondrous, the present day though technologically wondrous the present day Calorian City was, Inner City was not the flashiest it had to offer. It was the place of political and economic power, not commerce and rampant neon consumerism, making it somewhat cleaner and safer than other parts of Calorian City or any other world of dense population. It was like a channel or heart through which the infected lifeblood of all UCS flowed at some point or another. Skyreath now drove his black car down the wide road dubbed Glory Street, leading directly to the capital. A great black dome-like structure built with its back to the edge of a massive cliff overlooking northern city below, somewhat like a rounded half-cone on its side, with stairs leading up to its open base. The morning sunrise gleaming off the ancient building's glossy sheen would have been beautiful had Skyreath not known what lied inside. Every day he looked upon it now, the building he once saw with historical awe was now like a looming house of death, beckoning both body and soul within. Skyreath didn't know whether or not to believe he or anyone else actually had a soul as he pulled along. Skyreath didn't know whether to believe he or anyone else actually had a soul as he pulled around a long driveway into the presidential garage, but after losing Lullian, he hoped there was. Unfortunately, upon getting out of the vehicle and staring up the building where so many vessels of greed and corruption awaited him, he found it difficult to believe. Even though his people may have once had a soul, figuratively or not, it was clear they had lost it long ago. Skyreath secretly intended to restore it one way or another, but with each passing day he realized that goal was almost, if not entirely, impossible, even with all the power of his position. Forward he marched up the long stairs into the Capitol building, entering its grand, polished halls, into another day of steadily attempting to quietly and peacefully alter the deadly course his people endured. Already his ears were met with a cacophonous aura of murmurs from politicians and businessmen from all around the galaxy within the main lobby, but little was his desire to converse with them. Skyreath moved quickly to the elevator, trying to stay unnoticed, but it was difficult to not catch eyes when his suit had the telltale seal of the first senator upon its back. Fortunately, he was able to evade the others in the lobby and make it to the elevator alone, but that was only a brief respite before the true storm. As the elevator reached his office floor, he stepped out into the short hallway where there were only 3 doors, one at the end of the hall and 2 on the left and right near it. The left and right were an old closet and unused sparring room from an ancient time, and betwixt them was his office. Once upon a time, the royal quarters of the emperor in the time of the Clepathian Empire, and perhaps a place of similar importance before that empire even existed. He stepped down the carpeted hall, opening the door at the end of it, and was greeted by his office awaiting him, just as he left it the day before. It was Skyreath's home away from home. There wasn't much within the room, many shelves along the walls with historical, decorative knickknacks, portraits of past political figures of importance, and his desk near the middle of the room flanked by 2 flags of the UCS. It faced towards Skyreath like a prison awaiting its prisoner, its back to a great one-way window replacing the entire rear wall, allowing clear view of the sunrise in the entirety of northern city below. It allowed sight into freedom from this trap. Begrudgingly, Skyreath slowly walked forward. Whoa, okay. Hold on a minute. I can take a breath. Allowing sight into freedom from this trap. Begrudgingly, Skyreath slowly walked over to his desk and sat down, turning on his computer to start the day's work. At first, it was easy enough, only a few hundred holomail letters to sift through compared to the few thousand he'd often have. Approving this, disapproving that, allocating funds here and there, scheduling appointments, postponing others, all of these things carefully calculated to subtly set forth the undoing of what the UCS had become. He knew the UCS's law and organization down to the letter like a painful obsession lacerated into the back of his skull, but the, but this not but with this knowledge came a sliver of hope as he worked loopholes to gradually push against the true owners of the UCS. This work, while mind-numbingly tedious, wasn't what he minded most. No, the real pain of work came when he heard the real pain of work came when he heard a ringing of his office doorbell. He balled his fists, already knowing what awaited him, but then relaxed them with a sigh before speaking. "Come in," he said. The door slid open, and waltzing their way within was a rather uptight-looking fellow with a clean black suit and hat. Flanking him at either side were what appeared to be his own bodyguards, who stood at the doorway as the suited Clepathian waltzed his way towards Skyreath. Just by his get-up alone, his cane, his hat, his ornate watch, and the rudimentary white gloves he wore on his clawed hands, Skyreath knew this type already. He knew why he was here, and it was not for pleasantries around the samovar. The suited, wealthy Clepathian, without so much as even taking off his hat as a subtle smile on the cheek. Without so The suited, wealthy Clepathian, without so much as even taking off his hat as a subtle smite on the cheek to Skyreath spoke with the most posh tone. "First Senator Skyreath, I pray the morning fares you well." "I suppose it has," Skyreath replied with an innocent look over his shoulder at the view behind him. The wealthy Clepathian frowned with a slight sneering disdain. Someone of your caste should know that I'm a very important individual, and keeping me waiting could hamper the flow of profits and progress. I suppose waiting here for 30 whole minutes is to be expected with your new offspring," said the wealthy Clepathian, tasting the words as if they were sour on his tongue. Skyreath stiffened his upper lip, clenching his fists below his desk where the one before him could not see. Already he wanted to tear him as well as the multitude of others like him apart for such disregard of his son's needs alone. "I apologize dearly," he forced the words through his teeth. "What is it you need, Mr. Langhess?" said the wealthy Clepathian, rolling his eyes. "Mr. Langhess, I see," nodded Skyreath. Langhess adjusted his bow tie and cleared his throat. "Back on track. My delegates have recently reported unto me the unfortunate truth that taxation rates upon the Learkun quarter of the galaxy have gone up an absurd 0.27% for those of a yearly income of 100 million UCS marks, such as myself. Before I let myself jump to accusations, might I ask why?" Skyreath tilted his head slightly, perplexed at how upset Langhess seemed at such a small taxation increase. With the average citizen usually earned only around 40,000 UCS marks per year. He held his finger up and tried to reason with the Baron before him. The local parks and monuments of the Rylus Quarter were falling into a state of disrepair, and their emergency personnel were lacking necessary funding to keep several cities healthy and— "Ha! Oh, funny joke," interrupted Langhess with a dejecting wave of his hand as he laughed, but then stopped and stared Skyreath dead in the eyes, with his smile gradually fading. "Parks and monuments are pointless. There are history," Skyreath rebutted, letting his emotions show through for a split second. "They're a waste of resources," growled Langhess. He stood in front of the desk and glowered down at Skyreath. "The lives of a few unfortunate insignificant are also of no consequence." Skyreath blinked, astonished at the careless words. "Insignificant? They are living, breathing people. They are nothing more than sentient livestock, and you know it," Langhess scoffed. "They will never aspire to anything more than getting their next fix to fire off the dopamine receptors in their addled, uneducated brains. You've seen it, all around you, even in the so-called shining jewel that is this planet. Those people are like unthinking beasts." Langhess pointed out the window behind Skyreath to Northern City. "Moving solely on impulse to satiate their lowly cravings, they exist to serve those like myself, and in turn, we feed them the high they chase. Livestock, do you see? They get their fodder, we get their capital. This city, among all others, is nothing more than a vast plantation of metal and stone. We are its owners." Skyreath looked back over his shoulder out the window, but then again to Langhess with his mouth agape in utter shock at Langhess. Langhess stared down at him. But if you insist to hurt those of us who make this galaxy spin round, Langhas gave a whirling motion of his finger through the air, then do not act surprised when certain resources go missing. You and I both know that can't happen, for we also know that only one of us will take the blame when the rodents are denied their sweet, succulent carrots. Knowing well what Knowing well that he inevitably took the flak when anything went wrong in the galaxy, even when he wasn't at fault, Skyreath was forced into a corner by Langhas' greedy, clever switchblade tongue pressed against his throat. Langhas leaned down with his hands on Skyreath's desk, meeting Skyreath at eye level as he spoke quietly. It is in our mutual interest, is it not? Think about it now. When the livestock gets angry, they will no longer just target you, but those you love as well. Think about your son. Surely you wouldn't want him to come under any crosshairs, eh? Langhas glanced at the photograph of Locta on his desk. Skyreath stared Langhas in his cold, sociopathic eyes. It took every fiber of his strength to resist the urge to wrap his fingers around that posh Clepathian's throat and toss him out the window down the 3-mile-high cliff behind him. With controlled, forced breath, Skyreath spoke through his teeth. Fine. I'll null the taxes, but I'll make sure the people of the Rylus Quarter know why they're bordering on anarchy. I'd advise against telling them anything, lest you want to go down the history as the first senator who divided our nation. Langhas stood up. But I leave that at your discretion. Good tidings, First Senator, he laughed to himself as he turned around and departed Skyreath's office with his bodyguards. Staring with fuming, tired anger at the door as it closed, Skyreath muttered to himself, No, I won't be the divider of nations. I'll be the ones who brings it back together, with or without silken gloves. Not long after Langhas left, the doorbell rang again and a lump swelled in Skyreath's throat. He looked at the clock on the wall to see that it was still morning. 12 hours were left to go. 12 hours more of dealing with those like Langhas, whom held him like a hostage and a puppet. Once again, he spoke, as his duty of first senator mandated. Come in, he stammered and straightened his posture. Once again, another not so different from Langhas entered, and the cycle of threats and bargains repeated. Minute by minute, hour by hour, Skyreath was bombarded with threats and blackmail on one end, and endless mountains of paperwork on another. That wasn't even considering all the traveling from one end of the galaxy to the next he did over the course of the day, doing the same thing on other equally sick and corrupted worlds, as he did in his office on Chelor. By the time the day came to a close, Skyreath sat panting and sweating, his hands clutched around his ears and elbows on his desk, his teeth gritted and his heart pounding with a flood of fear, anger, and misery. His fur was scruffy and bedraggled from his own nervous clawing at his head, wishing someone would just shoot him dead and to release him. Then, right when the torment was nearing its limit within him, like a lion denied its rightful anger, his shift ended. The subtle beeping of a small alarm clock on his desk signaled that the workday had ended, and the wash of relief fell over him like ice snuffing out a fuse inches away from setting off the nuclear bomb within. Indeed, it was relieving, yes, but over time he had learned to hate being relieved. Sometimes now he wanted justification to let loose, to stand up and tear the life out of those who sucked it from him and left him like a walking corpse by the day's end. They took his life slowly. To end theirs quickly would be almost too merciful. But unfortunately, his sanity and better judgment held him back. Skyreath stood up. Skyreath stood up and took a deep breath. Looking back out the window as the setting sun cast its rays over the jungle of steel and concrete that was Chelor's cityscape. Everything he lived and suffered for. So often now did he feel as if it were all in vain, but he looked away from the window to the small framed picture of Locta on his desk. He remembered what he fought for, what he suffered for. The questions lingered within him. How much could a mere soul offer? Or how much could a mere soul suffer? How much weight could he carry? Until they finally collapsed. For Skyreath, there was lingering, ominous shadow stalking the dark places in his heart and mind that maybe soon he'd find out for himself, and he would be powerless to stop it. All he could hope for was that his work would be done. All he could hope for was that his work would be done before it happened. If Skyreath was to fall, succumb in some way to what he feared from within, he only hoped that his son, his hopes and legacy, would carry onward where he failed. That day, both fortunately and unfortunately, was not today. Skyreath quietly shut down his computer and left the office behind him, with his head hanging tired and low, traveling back the way he came, down the elevator into the lobby and out to the presidential parking garage, he entered his car and started its engine. Just as he did when he was about to leave the home, he paused for a moment with the engine idle, letting the buzzing echoes of the day ruminate through his numbed, fatigued mind. After a couple months, he buckled himself in the seat and pulled out of the parking garage, proceeding down the driveway and onto Glory Street towards the highway leading home. He drove back around the cliffside highway, the bulk of inner city disappearing in his rearview mirror under the orange sunset sky, and let out a little drawn-out sigh. Though it was not the quickest way to and from work, this highway did offer one thing: peace. Few traveled this old mountain road, being more of a scenic route or detour if the main road needed maintenance, but otherwise it was empty, peaceful. Rolling down the window, Skyreath let the warm, late summer wind blow upon his face and catch upon his sensitive ears, almost like a relaxing massage in a way, as the wind swept them back. With one hand on the wheel and the other hanging out the door, Skyreath savored the moment and drove slowly. Occasionally, he glanced at the lanyard hanging from his rearview mirror. Upon it was a picture of his wife, Lillian. Like the picture of Lacta at work, he kept him strong for a time. But as the days went on, their power over his growing stress waned. He needed something more, something else to give him hope for the future he desired, not just for his people now, but for his tattered and burdened spirit. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it again. That strange figure in sackcloth standing at the edge of the road. Skyreath blinked and looked at him, this time slowing the car to a crawl as he passed by. Once again, the figure just stared at him, smiling. Skyreath shook his head and continued driving, accelerating back to speed as he passed, but now a sense of curiosity swelled within him. This was no mere fatigue-spawned hallucination as he suspected, so who was it? Skyreath had never seen him before, nor anyone dressed like him. Maybe it was just some vagrant, he thought. He looked at the clock on the dashboard display of the car, knowing that Lacta would be home soon, but the curiosity within Skyreath was too much to ignore. He put both hands on the wheel, took a deep breath as he silently hoped his son would forgive him, and then turned the wheel hard to the right, making a U-turn along the road where the figure was. Much to his astonishment, however, the figure was gone, just like before. Skyreath pulled the car over near the railing and put on the parking brake, magnetically locking it to the ground. He needed answers. He unbuckled himself and opened the door, but kept the engine running in the event that this figure was an unsavory degenerate. Walking around the car after shutting off the door, he looked over the railing where the figure once stood, and could see now that there was a simple dirty rope ladder tied to the railing supports, dangling into the deep cliffside forest below. As far as he knew, there had never been a ladder here before, and no one lived down there. No one until now, it seemed. Looking left and right down the highway, he saw there wasn't anyone else coming or going, and so he climbed over the railing, careful not to fall, and tested the rope ladder with a firm tug. It seemed secure enough to support his weight, but fear still swelled within him as he stared into the dark wilderness of the forest below. Why anyone would want to live there, he knew not. Could this figure have been a mystic? Mystics also lived an ascetic life among nature, but only in the southern, nigh inhospitable swamps of Chelor's single continent where civilization was unheard of. Rare was it to see mystics outside of their temples, let alone among civilization, for most no longer believed in the ancient religions the mystics were prophets of, casting them out and forcing them into total isolation. Rarer yet was finding a male mystic, as mystics were almost always traditionally females in Clepathian society, even in faithless times like now, where they numbered in the mere hundreds. This couldn't have been a mystic, he concluded, but that conclusion only piqued his curiosity even further. Starved for answers now, he grabbed the rope ladder and placed his claw-like toes in the rungs, beginning his descent below. Though Clepathian's toes and fingers were adapted for thrusting into soft, spongy wood or packed soil, allowing them to climb quite well, Skyreath followed the ladder, for it was his only guide to and from the highway above. With the shadows of the evening forest soon overtaking him, he eventually reached the bottom at last, and not but a few feet away from the ladder's base was a small hole dug into the ground, half buried in deadened leaves. Actually, let me review that. Within the small shadows of the evening forest soon overtaking him, he eventually reached the bottom at last, and not but a few feet away from the ladder's base was a small hole dug into the ground, half buried with deadened leaves. From within, there was but the faintest flicker of firelight. He had found its hovel, whoever it was. Ready to extend his styluses in self-defense at any moment, Skyreath cautiously glanced over his shoulder and slowly proceeded into the mouth of the dugout cave, avoiding crunching any twigs or leaves with each step. Having to crouch down at first, the cave slowly became wider, and the light became brighter. After a few seconds of descending, he found himself in a most strange yet cozy underground lodging. It was simple, rustic, with a small crackling fire pit, wooden furniture carved from logs, and a bed made of tattered sack stuffed with leaves. However, it was there where the inviting nature of it ended. Upon the table was a clay-filled bowl with what looked like a half-eaten wild bird, not even cooked and buzzing with flies, and on the walls, pictures of Skyreath and Lata. His fur standing on end, Skyreath gasped and took only one step back before he heard an unfamiliar voice behind him. "It's about time you showed up, wouldn't you say?" Skyreath jutted out a silvery stylus and whirled around to face the figure who spoke. "Don't make any sudden moves," he stammered nervously. The figure held up his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I've no interest to harm you," he said calmly. Who are you? Why have you been stalking my son and I?" Skyreath directed his attention to the pictures of himself plastered on the wall. The figure lowered his hands. "To better find you, of course. Surely you can understand why someone of my humble appearance cannot approach you directly." "That doesn't answer my question. What do you want with me? Who are you, and why do you hide your face beneath that hood?" questioned Skyreath, his heart pounding fast. You with the Secret Investigation Bureau trying to get me out of office, or some kind of higher look from one of those assholes today?" "I am not affiliated with either of those. In fact, I am not affiliated with any in this entire galaxy. Except you." Skyreath relaxed his posture slightly. "What?" he questioned, blinking at what he heard. "As implied by your surroundings and my earlier words, I have been watching you for quite some time. Longer than your memory can reach," slowly spoke the figure. "As for my true identity, it is not important, but you may call me..." He paused for an uncomfortably long moment, staring at Skyreath's eyes staring at Skyreath's eyes hidden under the shadows. "Pride. Yes, Pride. Pride? What kind of a name is that?" Pride then bowed his head as he grabbed his hood and pulled it back. So far, he seemed like any ordinary Clepathian, at least physically, but when he lifted his head and raised his eyelids, Skyreath gasped at the sight. His eyes were unlike any others. It was subtle, but the irises of Pride's eyes glowed as red as the coals in the fireplace to Skyreath's left. Pride noticed Skyreath's fear and bore a slight, friendly smile. "I know you're afraid, but you have little reason to fear me. In fact, I have come far to help you in your goals," said Pride with a bow, still speaking slow and gently. "My goals?" Skyreath asked, relaxing his stance further, slowly retracting his styluses. "Yes, Skyreath Felthmore," nodded Pride. "It is difficult to explain, but to keep matters brief, I come from a place far beyond this world, far beyond this galaxy, far beyond this universe, even. My kind possesses a sight beyond your comprehension, and we have seen your intentions." Skyreath bore a skeptical look, thinking this was some kind of lunatic, but his curiosity got the better of him, so he continued to lend Pride his ears for now. "You look around every day, see your people fallen and succumb to a pathetic, materialistic, and selfish life, and you yearn for the days of the past when your people were so mighty and powerful. You wish to return them to this greatness, and have worked so very hard to do so. But the harder you strive, the steeper the climb becomes." Sympathetically, Pride nodded and looked at the pictures on his walls, then looked back at Skyreath. "You wish to bring back a sense of pride, but I tell you that Pride has heard your call, and is coming to you. A gift for returning the favor from a forgotten age." "So, you figured me out," Skyreath nodded, but kept his distance. You know that I've been working with an underground of individuals wishing to overthrow the rules of avarice in place. So what? Even if you speak the truth, and you do come from some kind of place far away, who are you to help me?" questioned Skyreath, as Pride listened with discerning stare. Pride listened with a discerning stare. "If there is a creator, then the creator knows I've tried everything I can, and if the first senator of the UCS can't put a stop to the UCS's current course, then I doubt some old hermit in a cave can. The UCS governs the entire galaxy, and my ancient ancestors during the early days of the Carpathian Empire scourged the other species from it through our might, so who could possibly stop it? You'd better have a mighty army wherever you come from, because the way I see it... He paused, remembering the grave news about his son from this morning. There's no hope left. Pride nodded and blinked slowly. Your concerns are not without logic. Your organization and all its efforts will fail indeed. Yet your perspective on the matter has yet to see that your galaxy is but one of countless. He turned and slowly walked around the cracked wooden table as Skyreath eyed him. One thing you will come to know about me, Skyreath, is that though I cannot say everything, I do not lie in the things I can. Your people have lost so much knowledge over the eons, your history little more than a footnote. And among these things you have forgotten is remembrance of my kind. The figure stared Skyreath in the eyes with a wide smile as he held up his hand, and then, from the air, a swirl of red flame danced above his palm. In sheer awe at the dazzling supernatural display, Skyreath watched as Pride conjured a chair from the flame for himself to sit in, defying all he knew about the laws of reality. What? What are you? Gasped Skyreath in a trembling whisper. You will know in time, Skyreath Filthmore. But all you need to know now is that my allies and I are far... But all you need to know now is that my allies and I from far beyond are more powerful than anything the UCS could hope to rival. And we're here to help you, Skyreath, if you're just willing to listen, said Pride, sitting in his conjured chair with one leg crossed over the other in a relaxed pose. Skyreath backpedaled 2 steps towards the exit of the cave as he stammered in his growling discomfort. It's getting late. My boy will be home soon, and I should really... He can wait. For both you and I know that he is, quite independent, reassured Pride. He will be fine, and I will not keep you much longer. Looking over his shoulder at the exit of the cave, Skyreath took a deep breath and gulped before looking back at Pride. Okay, if you insist. I do. Please, sit down. Pride offered him a seat, one of the wooden chairs at the opposite side of the table. Curiously, Skyreath sat in the chair across from the strange being, staring at him with a curious anxiety. Pride spoke again. I did say I would keep this brief, and so I shall maintain my promises. Please, hold forth your left hand. Skyreath looked at his left hand before slowly extending it over the table. Pride reached his left hand out as well, rubbing his clawed fingers against Skyreath's with eyes fixated upon it, studying it as if reading a textbook. Though most of a Carpathian's fingers and all of a Carpathian's toes were entirely bone-like claws, they were still able to feel, via vibrations by a sensitive nerves within, to say that Skyreath was uncomfortable with such a strange individual, a strange creature, touching his hand in such a manner was an understatement of magnitudes. What are you doing? Skyreath asked Pride with a gulp. Pride paused his reading and noticed Skyreath. There is only so much I can tell you of how dire your people's situation is. Like any story, be it of the past or future, most things are best not told of, but shown. Skyreath then felt a strange warmth on the back of his hand, and looked down to see Pride's hand glowing with red fire over his. He tried to pull back out of reflex, but Pride's grip was like a shadowback's jaws as a mystical flame raced up his arm and blinded his vision. Skyreath cried out, but then heard his screams fall into muffled nothingness as his senses faded. Soon they returned, but as Skyreath opened his eyes and looked around where he stood now, he was no longer within the cavern with Pride, but alone. All around him, Skyreath saw nothing but ash, death, and ruin. He stood in what appeared to be the remains of Glory Street among smoldering ruins of present-day inner city. A scent of burning fuel and flesh filled the air as white ash fell like snow, creating an eerie fog over the wasteland all around him, burying countless dismembered corpses strewn about the battered streets. His breath quickened as dread filled him, and he cried out to the abandoned ruins all around him. Hello? Anybody there? Like ghostly whispers, only echoes of his own voice, and the soft wind answered back. Stunned by the shock and awe, Skyreath did not move forward 1 inch, but when he looked down, he saw something glint in the ash. He looked down to the ground and brushed the soot from it, and instantly recognized the pattern on the small medallion, looking like some sort of insignia. It was a crest which looked like the Felthmore family seal, a symbol representing their family line. It was black in color, flanked by gold and silver, with a black circle around the circumference. Never had he seen this family seal with such coloration, but as soon as he stood up and looked around, he realized they littered the ground like autumn leaves. Skyreath stood back up and looked to the damaged, smoking Capitol building. With a fearful gulp, he took his first steps towards it. Through this ruined wasteland, but all the while, he felt as if someone or something were following through the ashen fog. What was once a walk turned into a jog, and then a full panic sprint towards the Capitol building. He ran as fast as he could as he felt an inexplicable alien kind of dread surging from within, as if he were caught in the hunter's sights. Suddenly, however, Skyrie skidded to a halt in the ash as he came into clearer view of the Capitol building. His ears and shoulders slumped, his jaw fell agape, and his eyes widened at what he saw flowing upon its flagpoles in place of the UCS banners, the tattered banners of the Clepathian Empire. As soon as he turned and looked behind him, studying his surroundings further, he then realized what had happened here. A battle had been fought here, on Chelor, even though it had not seen war touch its soil since the Clepathian ancestors long ago first set foot on it. Not during the era of pioneers, neither. Not during the era of pioneers, neither. Not during the era of pioneers, neither during the era of the Clepathian Empire and both its rise and fall. Not even in the primordial conflicts had such violence disgraced its land. What could possibly have wrought such ruin? What did these banners and this insignia held in his hands mean? Before he could even think of a conclusion, he heard something behind him, freezing him with dread to the point where he dared not even turn around to see it. From what he heard, the great creature was easily twice his height, beating the air with great wings as it approached and landed with a heavy thud and clink of its metal armor. At first he thought it some kind of great mythical beast, but then it spoke one simple word in a voice which stopped time itself. Father. Slowly, Skyreath turned around, but when he tried to look upon the great creature, he was instantly blinded by a light brighter than 1,000 suns. It burned his eyes, his mind, his soul with its luminescence, searing his very being with a torturous agony, until it stopped. Suddenly, almost as soon as it started, it stopped. Once more, Skyreath could hear the warm, inviting crackle of the fire pit behind him, a stark contrast to the cold and dead world from before. The voice of the one who called himself Pride joined them. Open your eyes, Skyreath. All is well. With a gasp, Skyreath opened his eyes to see he was back at the table, sitting across from Pride, who still had gripped his hand. What happened? What was that? What you have seen is a glimpse of the future. A future that will come to pass if you fail and the UCS keeps its course, said Pride. There was so much death. I saw this strange symbol, and there was this creature. This creature called me father. Stammered Skyreath in a shivering panic. Pride seemed unfazed by Skyreath's words, but leaned back in consideration, taking his hand away from Skyreath's. Did he now? Visions into the future can be as direct as they can be vague. Everything has a meaning, be it clear or veiled. It would be wise for us to discuss this and meditate on this further, but I suppose I have kept you long enough. Shown you enough for now. Pride stood up, dismissing his chair into nothingness. Skyreath stood up as well, as Pride spoke again. You should return home now. Get some rest. But there is one final question I must ask after showing you so much thus far. What's that? Asked Skyreath, now no longer feeling as if Pride was an enemy, but still curious in his words. Will you accept my hand in assisting you? The way I see it, you don't have much of a choice. Pride asked with a knowing grin, his glowing red eyes piercing into Skyreath's soul as if he already knew the answer. Skyreath took a deep breath and sighed, his heart still pounding and whole body trembling in fear of what he saw. I suppose you're right. You've shown me more than enough, and I would accept any help, pay any price to prevent this future from coming to pass. Excellent. The pact is sealed, then. Return to me after your menial labor every day from here on out for more knowledge, and planning on what we can do to help each other. There is much work to do, and the road ahead shall be long and arduous. But with my power and your influence, you will have your empire back. said Pride with a most devilish grin. Your people will have their pride again. Skyreath nodded and began his way out of the cave, back to the surface. It was then, by the sound of crickets and gloaming darkness all around, that he realized day had turned to night. With a sense of urgency as he thought about Lokta, he scurried up the rope ladder and back to his car, still running and waiting for him where he left it. He closed the door, buckled in, flicked the headlights on, and sped home. After arriving home and parking in the garage, he rushed out of the car and into his home before calling out for his son. Lokta? He called out, but there was no response. Worried sick, he ran down the hall to Lokta's room, and then felt a wave of relief wash over him as he saw him lying in bed, cuddling with his favorite plush toy, fast asleep. Oh, thank goodness, he said to himself with a relieved sigh. But then parental guilt washed over him as he failed to uphold his promise to Lokta. He wanted to wake him up and apologize, but then he considered the recent vision shown to him by that mysterious figure. It did not wake him, but simply turned away and closed the door. That creature of burning light, it called him father. If a vision was full of symbols, then what could this mean? This question remained like a scar burned into Skyreath's mind for the next 12 years. With a pact made with Pride, the wheels of fate started to churn again. 12 years would Skyreath continue seeing Pride. 12 years would he and his son grow apart. Little did Skyreath know what deadly trap he had fallen into. Little did he know just who his son would grow into. Alright, I'm going to take a short break here. I'm getting a little winded. I need to take a bit of a breather, but we'll get to chapter 5 here soon. So, I hope everybody's having a decent time so far. Apologies for the stutters and stammers. Reading live is not something I'm very used to. Take a sip of water here. Better than decent? Yeah, that's good enough. The voices are good too. Yeah, I enjoy voicing characters. I can't put as much effort into live reading as I can an audiobook, because with an audiobook I can do multiple takes and cut out the stutters and whatnot. So you've heard my audiobooks. I can do cool things like sound effects and whatnot. I can't really do that live, but I'm doing what I can. Maybe I'll get better at it in the future. Alright, few deep breaths. Big stretch. Alright. I think we're good. Chapter 5, A Final Bargain. For every night of every day for nearly 12 years, Skyreath continued his meetings and visions with a mysterious figure who called himself Pride. Like a fish drawn to a lure, Skyreath could not resist this intoxicating, entrancing power Pride wielded, seeking more and more answers and hidden truths about reality. He learned many secrets about the true history of his people, the galaxy, the universe, and the nature of all things, knowledge lost to the ages, all from the mouth of the bizarre red-eyed creature merely in the shape of a Clopathian, all from the mouth of Pride. At times, along the way, he'd sometimes wonder if it was all true, or if he was being deceived. Like a small voice of the past, there was a faint yelp telling him to turn away from Pride, a sense of error and wrongdoing, but it felt so right. Not only did Pride show Skyreath the future and lost knowledge, he taught him how to wield these powers so long as he kept it away from prying eyes until the time was right. So tempting was it to scorch the faces from those like Lang Hess and bring the entire galaxy to his knees before him with the magics he commanded. Magics he once believed were just myth and legend. But Pride insisted that he waited and remained disciplined, for the Clopathians were not as alone in the galaxy as they thought. There was another, hidden in plain sight, with technology allowing them to remain invisible to physical detection right under the Clopathians' small black noses. Pride informed Skyreath of other sentient beings which coexisted with the Clopathians for long, even before the primordial conflicts, appearing so few times that one could count them on their digits. The last time they appeared, Pride once said, was during the primordial conflicts when the last emperor, the one Skyreath's son was named after, bestowed specific instructions and lessons unto them, among which was for them to remain invisible until 25 millennia's time. This was the last thing Pride said to him before he arrived home on this particular night, and he warned that the next time they meet, the time for action would come at last. However, as Skyreath now laid in his bed on the night before Locta's graduation from public school, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep as a rainstorm beat down outside. The bed always felt uncomfortable without Lullian to share it with him, even 18 years since her death, but now there was a new discomfort which steadily arose within him until now when it finally reached its apex, and he could tolerate it no longer. Guilt. For hours into the storming summer night, he groaned and shifted with all this knowledge flashing through his mind like bolts of lightning from outside. Yet the one piece of it which screamed louder than all else was the first vision shown to him on the fateful evening 12 years prior. Like a perpetual nightmare, it tormented him every night. That winged creature, the burning light, calling him with a voice so sharp it divided marrow and bone from spirit, and it called him father. Skyreath's eyes shot open and he rose from a bed with a crack of thunder outside, panting in a cold sweat as his eyes darted around the room. He clutched his face in the palms of his hands, feeling the burden of 12 wasted years finally come crashing down upon him. The son he loved, or once seemed to love, practically grew his whole childhood without him, becoming little more than an afterthought for Skyreath despite once being the sole reason to live. His pride. Throwing his blankets off of him as the thunder rolled outside, Skyreath stood up and quietly paced down the halls, slowly opening the door to Locta's room. There he laid, just as he laid 12 years ago, when he burst into his room with a kind of guilt all too similar. Locta was no longer a small child as he was then, but nearly a grown man, 18 Calorian years of age, having practically raised himself. 18 years down the drain. Skyreath balled his fists in bitter, miserable anger. After all this time chatting with and learning from Pride, addicted to his powerful wisdom, never once did he bring up any questions regarding his son and his future. All of it was centered around Skyreath. Him. So selfish out of starvation for relief and desperation for reprieve, luring him into a deadly trap of apathy he was too blind to see. But now it was too late to stop it. I'm sorry, Locta, but I hope you understand that I do this for the greater good, mourned Skyreath with tears in his eyes as he turned and left Locta's room. Grabbing the keys to his car off his counter and making his way out to the garage, he jumped in his car, still in his sleepwear, and ignited the engine before driving out into the stormy black night. Keeping a careful eye on his clock and speedometer, he drove faster than he ever had towards the cliffside highway as the rain beat harder on his vehicle. Once again, he needed answers, but this time not for himself alone. Upon reaching the cliffside where the rope ladder dangled below, he got out of the car and into the pouring rain and frigid wind, and stepped over this thick steel railing. Careful not to slip, he gripped the ladder tight and began his descent below, but halfway down he felt the rope begin to slacken. In a panic, he gasped and looked up as a bolt of lightning split across the sky, and suddenly the ladder was pulled loose. Skyreath fell and tumbled down the muddy cliff, battered and beaten by hard rocks and sharp briars over and over. He cried out in panic as the elements ripped his flesh and bruised his bones, but no one could hear his voice over the wind and thunder. No one would hear his voice, now when he had forsaken the only one in his life who listened. As he laid on the ground where his nigh deadly descent left him, face down in the mud and rocks where cuts and bruises ripped through his garments, the punishing rain poured heavy down upon him, within him. He had one chance, one hope in this world, and he gave it up for the silvered, intoxicating powers shown to him by a stranger manipulating his own exhaustion against him. He disowned his own son in all ways except by mouth, and now as he lifted his head and peered with sorrowful eyes at the mouth of the cave before him, he wondered why he returned to this place, as if it had cursed him so. Like mere cattle led to the feeding trough, Skyreath felt himself compelled by some bitter force within to stand up in the mud in spite of his wounds, and proceeded within the cave. With a limping gait and hands braced against the wall, Skyreath trudged through the cave until he reached the small room within, but the fire was extinguished, and all was pitch dark. He looked and felt his way around, screaming for his ally. "Pride, are you there?" called out Skyreath with a shiver. For a moment, nothing answered back, but then the room was suddenly illuminated with the roaring sound of fire pit igniting his own. Skyreath looked behind him at the crackling fire to see a strange swirl of black and red smoke arise from its flames, swirling and coalescing into the shape of a Clepathian until he recognized the figure. "Pride!" exclaimed Scream in desperation. Once fully manifested, the sackcloth and all, Pride glared at Scream in deep disdain. Why have you come so early? The hour is not yet ready. His voice was nearly a growl. Skyreath bowed his bloodied and mud-drenched head submissively. I'm sorry, but I couldn't rest. I am not your physician, Skyreath. Go home, commanded Pride, his form starting to shimmer and fade again. Skyreath reached out his hand, trying to stop him. Wait! It's not about me. It's about my son. Pride reconstituted back into his physical form again, eyeing Skyreath with a curious tilt of his head as he slowly blinked. Speak. Quickly, he commanded. Clasping his shivering hands together with his eyes shifting left and right, Skyreath tried to organize his thoughts. He took a deep breath and sighed. My son, locked to Felthmore. All these years, I can't help but feel I've forsaken him. Pride seemed intrigued. He conjured up a seat for him to recline on once again, as he had on previous occasions, and sat upon it. Likewise, Skyreath sat down across from him, almost out of ritual at this point. Pride rubbed his chin with that piercing, soul-staring gaze, and his eyes of coal, and then shook his head. You do not yet see it, then, do you? See what? Skyreath questioned. And I thought you were clever, Skyreath, but it seems I have spoiled your mind by doing all the thinking for you, softly scolded Pride. Nevertheless, it is I who is to blame. Skyreath Felthmore, I need you to listen to the next words I say very carefully, for what I am about to tell you will mark the beginning of the end of the UCS in one way or another. He grinned at the magical flame in his fingertips. Leaning forth on the table, Skyreath nodded. I'm listening. Then let me be perfectly clear when I say this. Loch de Felthmore was never yours to begin with, said Pride. Skyreath blinked in confused disbelief, taken aback by the statement. Excuse me, what? I say no lie. He never was your son. The sooner you come to accept this, the better, said Pride with an arrogant grin. His conception in the womb of your now deceased wife was not by your doing, but by the will of adversaries to my kind. Remember how I told you of an ancient struggle my kind have been fighting against this so-called creator? He spat out the last word in disgust. With a lump in his throat, Skyreath nodded. And you remember our latest chat about others in this galaxy who spy on your people to this day, awaiting the precise moment to make their move against you? Asked Pride again. Yeah, Skyreath gulped. Pride nodded and steepled his hands. Then piece them together and think for a moment. Many times have I said unto you that all of reality, both within and without the universe, is intertwined. These alien creatures and your son are no different. But you do not yet know that your son is not your own. But how is that even possible? Skyreath shook his head and questioned. My, Skyreath. Is there a reason to be so shrewd after all that I have shown you? Pride lit a candle merely by touching the wick with his finger. Is it so difficult to believe that your son's name and the name of his birth, and the time of it, is it so difficult to believe that your son's name and the time of his birth are of no coincidence? These aliens knew this day would come, for they too have great power in their own ways. They are slippery, cunning, and clever with their own sacred knowledge, and long have they awaited the day when Loch to Felthmore would be birthed again, for they believe, as he too will believe, that he is to bring about an era for them and their promised holy nation. Pride continued on as Skyreath listened. These aliens, calling themselves the Clan Fayar, will take Locta and fill his mind with all sorts of saturine whispers, and thus he will speak the same deluded dreams unto your people. Through him, the Clan Fayar will tear the Clepathians apart. They will bring war to this world and many others, and this war will be one without an aftermath, a war that will never end. Pride spoke slowly, leaning over the table as he instilled his calculated words of warning into Skyreath. But wait, what if I could convince him otherwise? Skyreath pleaded through stammering lips. What if I could... Do you honestly think that after so many years of being such a small presence in his life, that he'd listen to you over what he calls out greater to him? interjected Pride with a snarl. As I have told you, Lacta is not and never was your son. He is something else. Like me, he manifests to the eyes like one of your own, but beyond the flesh and bone, he is something of far greater significance. He will have his calling soon, his purpose, and it will be one that he cannot refuse even if he wanted. If he succeeds, he will bring about change in a way that will irreparably alter the Carpathians. But if you and I succeed, we can restore order and purpose as you see fit to the Carpathian people. Skywreath gasped and shook his head in disbelief. What? You're asking me to turn my back on the only family I have left. Without him, I'd have no heir, no legacy. There will be no shortage of mates for you to reproduce with. Finding them will be easy for you as Emperor, callously stated Pride with an apathy as cold as the storm outside. Your legacy of flesh is no excuse, we both know that. So the only thing truly left holding you back from moving forward is now your fear of loss. But look around you, dear Skywreath. Don't you see that you have nothing left to lose? Skywreath cradled his head in his hands, eyes staring down at the table as his own claws dug into his fur-covered skin, indecisive about the future. Pride smirked and continued, Think about it. After all you have given your son, what has he given to you? How many times over these years has he come forth to you and asked if you were feeling well, or volunteered to spend time with you like any son who loves his father would have done? He hasn't. Skywreath's eyes glossed over, tears rolling off his cheeks onto the table as he started to sob. As I said years ago, he is quite capable on his own, and this is not a learned behavior, but part of his nature. He doesn't need you, Skywreath, and you don't need him, Pride instilled. Just to make my point clearer, think about his disability and how much it weighs down upon you, how weak it makes him in the eyes of his peers. Even if you could prove me wrong and convince Lacta to stay at your side, he'd never live up to the hopes and dreams you have for him. Lacta is a killer of all that you desire, a ticking time bomb waiting to destroy all that I have promised you. And yet you still cling to him. Intriguing, but erroneous. Idiotic as all flesh. Skywreath shook his head and looked up at Pride, still unable to bring himself to betray his heart. Then, what am I to do? I can't just disappear. He'll find me. I can't just tell him to go away on the spot. If you have so many answers and know so much about him, then what am I supposed to do? Skywreath's sobbing grief devolved into a confused, bitter anger. Pride stared him in the eyes with a cold, emotionless gaze, with his tone flattened like the line of a heart monitor on the days of Lolian's death. He muttered two simple words. Kill him. What? Exploded Skywreath, his brow furrowed into astonished rage, unable to believe what he was hearing. His tail whipped left and right while his ears perked high. Are you insane? Pride, with hands clasped, remained reclined and relaxed, only giving the slightest shrug and shake of his head. You heard me. Kill him. Make it simple and painless if you must, but be quick, for the longer he lives, the more the future of your people as you envision them is in danger. The more you are in danger, said Pride. If you do not kill him sooner or later, it is he who will kill you. No, he'd never do that. You lie. It's all lies. That's all it's ever been. Oh, excuse me, let me reread that. No, he wouldn't do that. You lie. It's all lies. That's all it's ever been. Skywreath shouted between panting, panic breaths. Yet even though he wanted not to believe it, there hadn't yet been a single time when Pride's words proved wrong. If anything, after all Skywreath heard and witnessed over the years, Pride's carefully chosen words were right. He was vague, but never technically wrong. Never lying, but never quite telling the whole truth. If it weren't for Pride, however, Skywreath wouldn't know what to believe. A life of so much confusion was behind him, and with Pride, at least there was some semblance of sanctuary and truth. It was someone, something he could trust in a universe aching to betray him, even when it came to turning him against his own son. Pride leaned forward and carefully grasped Skywreath's hands. If my words will do no justice, then let the future show you its deadly secrets. All of a sudden, as flame wrapped around Skywreath's hand, he was pulled into another vision of the future. When his senses came to, he found himself once again in the ruins of Chelor's inner city, but this time within his office overlooking the ruins of Northern City below. Just as before, all was gray. All was quiet. All was dead. Skyreath heard only his own panicked breathing and pounding hearts for a time, but then the muffled sound of those great flapping wings again from the outside raked across his ears, sending tendrils of icy dread down his spine and causing his fur to stand on end. He backpedaled away from it, knowing what pain would come simply from looking up at the creature, but then found his back against the wall, forced to look outside as the doom birth of light came for him. Skyreath blinked in shock and awe as he saw the creature. This time, for his full figure. He couldn't believe his eyes at the sight, as the creature looked like one of the ancient Clepathian depictions of angels. Shaped like a bipedal, fur-covered dragon, with four-eared Clepathian head and 3 clawed digits upon its hands and large feet, it crashed through the thick glass window and stared at Skyreath. Skyreath froze in terror as the creature approached, staring into the white flaming halo around its eyes. But then he saw his sword. That strange blade was one like he had never seen before, as was his shield, and it was all too late that Skyreath realized that this was no angel of his salvation, but of his judgment. With a bitter, mournful growl, the angelic beast grabbed Skyreath by his throat and lifted him up against the wall, his feet unable to reach the ground with a 10-foot-tall winged white creature holding him up to eye level. Skyreath grabbed its arm and squirmed in an attempt to break free, but his strength was nothing to the creature lifting him now. Its hands slammed shut around its throat like a coffin soon to hold his corpse. Then the creature spoke faintly with a voice like a distant echo stabbing into the depths of his soul. "Now you will suffer for what you've done," it said, and Skyreath stared into its eyes, his eyes. Somehow Skyreath had always known, but never had the evidence until now. This was Lacta. This was his son. Skyreath soon felt a searing hot pain burn within his chest, and when he looked down, he saw the sword of the creature impaled within him. He felt the life drain from him, and vision quickly faded. As Skyreath awakened from the vision, his eyes were already in tears as he could only barely comprehend this total, utter betrayal. "And now you have seen but a glimpse of what is to come if you do not act," said Pride. Sorrowful sobs turned into angry growls with Pride's words hammering down upon him. The emotional upheaval of so all-consuming that he could not even speak. Pride stood up from where he sat and walked over to Skyreath's side, leaning down to him as Skyreath sobbed and growled with feelings of betrayal, loss, hatred, and defeat. Continuing on this path had doomed him from the start, and now he could not turn back to fix it. He dug a grave for himself, and now he had no choice but to lie down in it. But was it really a grave? After all he had seen and learned, did he really have a choice but to succumb to Pride? He looked up at Pride, whose face was close to his, staring into those glowing, firing red, otherworldly eyes with his tear-laden own. Lightning cracked outside, and Pride spoke his final ultimatum to Skyreath. "The future is set. The paths have been laid out before you, Skyreath. Either Lacta dies, or you do." Oh, that was fun. Take a sip of coffee here. Hello, Stellaris. Sorry, I can't read while I'm breathing. Yoink 3 of the rainbow guns. Very nice, very nice. Take a breath. Let's see. Take a breath. Stretch. I recommend you guys, if you've been sitting a while, to stretch as well. Your leggies and whatnot. Need to go to bed. We'll be watching this VOD. Yeah, I still got about an hour and a half, so we're gonna make good progress here. We're getting a lot more progress than I thought. Alright. There's also an Altaria in chat. Did a few push-ups 30 minutes ago. Does that count? Yeah, I suppose. that does count. Alright. Let's see. Chapter 6. Innocence Lost. Graduation Day. This was the day that boys and girls became recognized as men and women. It was more than just a coming of age, but a symbol of a bright future, at least for most. Apologies for the dark barking. Lacta, laying in the same bed he had slept in every night since he was a small child, stirred at the sound of twittering birds as the faint rays of sunlight poured upon him through the window. Then the thought hit his awakening mind. Sunlight? He was late! With eyes shooting open, he sprang up from his bed so fast he slammed his head into the lamp overhanging it. "Ah, jeez!" exclaimed Lacta as he rubbed the sore spot on his head and sat back down on his mattress. Learning his lesson, he arose carefully, yet still with urgency. out of his bed and towards the closet. He gathered his clothes, no longer wearing the childhood wraps and tunic he left behind a few years back, but a simple pair of pants, a belt, and a shirt. After gathering his clothes, he walked down the hall to the bathroom and immediately got to showering, brushing his fur straight and stretching himself and dressing himself for the big day ahead of him. He even took time to polish his pearly white clawed fingers and toes to a glossy finish for this special day. When he got out of the bathroom, he realized something was odd. Where was his father? Both worried and curious, Locke rushed to his father's room, but found him not. He ran all the way to the other end of the moderately sized house and could not find him. When he opened the door to his garage, his black car was nowhere to be found. Oh, great. Looks like I am walking. Locke sighed and rolled his eyes in mild irritation. For several years now, he noticed his father becoming more and more distant. He still recalled the day when Skyreath promised he'd be home so many years ago, but for the first time ever, he was not. Locke's shoulders slumped as he looked down to the ground, still remembering how crushed he felt, and how every day that followed was so similar, but at this point it was an everyday thing. Did his father no longer love him, or was he just too busy? Too busy, yeah. He was just too busy, Locke convinced himself, forgiving him yet again. Locke rubbed his arms where his stillest slits should have been, if not for the bizarre birth defect. Oftentimes it weighed heavily upon him that he would never know what it was like to be fully Clepathian, that he would always have something missing from him. So often did he feel it was not just a physical part of him which were missing, but something more. This feeling, this void, it persisted for as long as he remembered, but he could never quite find that missing piece. Suddenly, his drifting thoughts were broken by the sound of a phone ringing from the kitchen counter. He turned and paced quickly back through the house, shaking his head and sighing in disappointment at himself for once again finding it difficult to care about things that should be important to him. He knew that his education was important, but all this time he felt as if he were only going through it because his father told him how necessary it was several years ago. For a time, Locke believed he'd find his niche along the way, his trust in his father and teachers carrying him forth. But now as childhood was at its end, he still hadn't a clue what he wanted to do with his life. What was he supposed to do? Even metalsmithing, his favorite hobby, was little more than a novelty to distract him. He always did crave something more, something of higher meaning. But in modern day UCS, there was no higher meaning. There was no faith in a greater purpose, no greater meaning to life, but only a pursuit of purpose, where one created their own. Indeed, this often sounded liberating to the ear, but as Locke saw the world more and more through his aging eyes, all he saw was slavery. Almost everyone, from his peers to his teachers, from the passerby on the street to the wealthy businessmen, they were all slaves to their own personal desires. To many, this was just the nature of life, and they were at least content with it. But for Locke, it wasn't enough. It was animistic, beast-like, and though his educators often taught that Clepathians were nothing more than highly evolved rats who developed intelligence by mere chance, Locke found that difficult to believe. When he looked out to the kitchen window and saw the towering buildings of the city gleaming in the late morning sun, he found the notion of such intelligence arising by simple chance unfathomable. To him, it was like accidentally knocking over a cup of Listorian tea and spilling it into the shape of Cheller's intricate northern city skyway system. The chances were there, yes, but so nigh infinitesimal that it felt like as if intelligent life were some kind of miracle of sorts. Of course, being young as he was, when he once brought this up, he was quickly ridiculed and put in his place by his teacher. He had very little right to challenge hundreds of years. No, of course, being as young as he was, when he once brought this up, he was quickly ridiculed and put in his place by his teacher, saying he had very little right to challenge hundreds of years of professional research. Since then, he humbled himself on this, and other similar notions of there being more to the universe, as his ideas were rejected as pure idiotic naivety. Who was he to question what the book said? Perhaps he was wrong. Being as young and experienced as he was, perhaps his desire for something more meaningful was sourced by his own sense of inadequacy wrought by his defectiveness. Or perhaps he was right. Locke chose to believe the latter, if only to keep his chin up and eyes forward. After reaching the kitchen counter, he picked up the ear and mouthpiece from the still ringing phone base and answered it. Hello? Felthmore household? And you are? Locke Felthmore? Son of Skyreath Felthmore? Locke raised a brow. The voice responded, Ah, yes, his son. Where is your father? He has not shown up to his office today. What? But he never misses work, Locke exclaimed, suddenly becoming worried. By your tone, I suppose he is not there either. The voice trailed off. Locke thought for a moment, drawing hopeful conclusion. Well, sir, my graduation ceremony is today in a few hours. Maybe he's waiting there. Hmm. Words from all of Worlds from all over the galaxy are in crisis, and he finds time for such frivolities? I see where his priorities are. I will let you go, Nocta. Do tell your father of our conversation. We have business, said the voice with a grumble before hanging up. Nocta blinked twice, astonished at the rudeness of whoever was on the other line, though he never came to expect it as this was though he came to expect it as this was not the first of this kind of call, and never failed to put him off. Nevertheless, he had a graduation ceremony to get to, and quick, so he put the phone away and conversation behind him. He snagged a school ID card from the counter where he left it the night before and booked it out the door. Unfortunately, the school was quite a distance away, and he had no transportation to get there. Most at his age had their first ground car, or some of the wealthier having their own sky cars or even personal spacecraft, but Locta always used the school's public transit. For 12 years now, even more in some ways, he relied on himself. It wasn't like he had a choice then, and neither now. Likewise, there was only himself to blame if he failed. Thus, he started his trek to school on foot. As he walked, he wondered where his father truly was. Maybe he was right, and Skyreath was waiting for him at the ceremony. But then why would he let Locta sleep so late? It was rare for Skyreath to ever take the day off. His career so important to him, Locta knew. So where was he? Locta only hoped he was safe. Hello, Sanaza. Even though they didn't talk much, even though he saw his father become more and more exhausted and bitter over the years, he still loved him. Maybe, Locta thought, his love was not enough. Not for he never had time to show it. Maybe Skyreath thought his own son abandoned him, failed him, thus his separation over the years was simply Skyreath setting up Locta to be out on his own. No, Locta denied the thought with a wincing shake of his head. Surely wherever he was, and whatever he was doing, it must have been important. Surely all was, or at least would be, well in the galaxy. Locta walked on and on, where the sidewalks took him, taking care not to step his bare feet in anything gross on the filthy concrete. As he approached the more densely populated areas of town, on the inner city outskirts, many a passerby noticed his lack of styluses and kept their distance with a raised brow. Like other creatures would distinguish between their kind with pheromones or patterns, Clopathians distinguish their own ways. Only between family, and close family at that, could Clopathians tell one another apart by their faces alone, since they were so similar to one another. The ways used by those not of kin were ear stripes and eye color at first. Second were the tail caps for male Pathians, silvery metal garments at the tips of their tails, serving as a cover-up for the male anatomy. Given how busy his father was when Locta began to physically mature, he forged his own, shaped like a simple arrowhead of chromed over mild steel. Females lacked tail caps, had a slightly different body shape with wider hips, mammaries, and slightly larger, more curvaceous ears. Voices were also a way to distinguish one another, but voices were easy to mask and alter. The most outstanding feature distinguishing Clopathians, however, were their styluses, all of them being unique in shape and size. They did not walk about with them extended, but simply lacking slits themselves was cause for wariness. Not having them at all made Locta appear to all else as not quite one of them, and oftentimes he felt as if they weren't too far off in their reaction. It was amusing. It was an amusing thought when he was younger and immature to believe he was some kind of mutant or alien from another galaxy when playing pretend with Crypto, but these thoughts were not without propulsion behind them. Of course, now he was certain that he was just an ordinary Clopathian with a condition he had no choice but to live with. At least, mostly certain. Even now, he wasn't entirely convinced, but this feeling was a secret he kept to himself for fear of looking like a fool. Ever quiet and avoidant as he was now to those he walked among, what worse way to ruin one's image even further than to start spouting lunacy? Sentient aliens in the Blazing Sun galaxy didn't exist, not anymore, at least as he learned from his history class, as those who once did looked nothing like Clopathians. His suspicion of not being entirely Clopathian was an entertaining thought, but one better off unheard by others. It was best to avoid eye contact with these people anyways, especially as you proceeded through some of the many unsavory parts of town. There were many scruffy individuals crowded in alleyways, some even slept on the stained, trashy streets, and there was a faint smell of garbage, exhaust fumes, and recreational drug cookeries in the air. Noctis took care to steer clear from those laying on the cardboard boxes along the curb, and avoid all eye contact with those who traveled in groups. Skyreath always told him to avoid these parts of town when he was younger, and he could see why, but he did not see them in the way Skyreath did. Rather, when Noctis looked upon them, upon all these ragged, depraved souls, he felt not hatred or disdain, as his father did, but a mournful pity. Let me do something here. It's kind of hot in my room. It was places like these which drove Locke to wonder if this was all there was to life. To be born, grow into adulthood, seek as much physical pleasure and wealth as possible, and then eventually die from an accident or illness down the line. Was that really it? In this era of advanced technology, Clepathians were biologically immortal, but estimated lifespan was still only around 500 years due to their own collective folly. Everywhere he looked, Everywhere he looked now on this rundown street, he saw broken souls and poisoned bodies without hope, without purpose. At times he wished, at times he wished for some kind of savior who would reach out and lift them up, give them new meaning to life. But he knew that was just fantasy. Locke knew better than to believe it could be different for everyone. But if intelligent life could arise, be it by natural order, by some greater miracles, then perhaps his hopes were not as impossible as his peers and elders thought. Maybe things could change, but the question was how. How could this change be brought about? How could one individual give purpose, no, salvation to the slavery of desire? He found no answer in his mind, but maybe he would change the future. But maybe he would in the future. Once again, he chose to believe. As he looked over the horizon to the distant capital in the east, he thought maybe he too could live up to his father's role and work to make life better for everyone. First, however, he had to make the final steps in finishing his education, but it seemed there were still many actual steps left between him and the school grounds. He took a deep breath and sighed as he carried onward, his legs starting to ache already. Even though Clepathians walked almost everywhere barefoot, some distances were just too far even for their hard claws and callous paw-like pads. Around 2 hours of nonstop walking had passed since he left home, when he heard familiar wail of a hovering ground car's engine approaching slowly from behind. At first, he hoped it would be his father when he turned around, but instead recognized the navy blue paint scheme and differing model as his friends, Crepto and Rodcrex. The horn honked as the car hovered up beside where Locta stood, and the tinted window on the passenger side rolled down, allowing Locta to see Crepto in the driver's seat. Crepto peered at Locta as if he were witnessing the very manifestation of lunacy. Locta? What are you doing all the way out here? Locta shrugged and scratched his head. Graduation ceremony's in a couple hours. With no other way to get there, I decided to walk. Shaking his head and rolling his eyes, Crepto unlocked the passenger side door. Locta, why do you always do this? Come on, get in. He waved his hand, beckoning Locta inside. Locta opened the door and sat in the passenger seat of Crepto. Locta opened the door and sat in the passenger seat of Crepto's vehicle, buckling himself in and closing the door as he questioned Crepto with a blank, ignorant stare. What? I don't get you sometime, said Crepto as he accelerated. Sometimes you can be so bright and reasonable, but other times it seems like you're the dumbest crayon in the box, I swear, he chuckled. Locta scratched his head and shrugged. What else was I supposed to do? I don't know, call someone for help, catch the bus? Crepto asked. Not walk through the slums like an idiot asking to get stabbed? You're gonna get yourself hurt, even killed one of these days. I prefer to solve things on my own, not bother others, Locta excused. I also woke up too late for the bus. Crepto rolled his eyes and sighed. Locta, you're not bothering. Wait, woke up too late. Doesn't your dad usually wake you up? He wasn't there. I don't know where he is, but I'm sure it's someplace important as usual, Locta said plainly and simply, leaning on his elbows as he looked out the window. Crepto found Locta's attitude about such a strange situation odd, but then again, Locta always did seem like he was always somewhere else in the head. Not quite grounded as the others, Crepto knew better than to say he was inattentive, however, for there were many times throughout their childhood together when Locta picked up on things no one else would, even calling out some of his teachers on their mistakes. He wasn't necessarily the smartest kid with the best test scores, neither the most talented for creative pursuits, but his perception, his ability to seemingly stare right through individuals, was exceptional to a disturbing degree. Krepto, by contrast to all the others, found this strange and stubborn individual amusing. With a smirk, Krepto spoke his mind. You know, we used to pretend and play a lot like you were some kind of alien from a different galaxy when we were little, but sometimes it seems like maybe you are some kind of alien. Oh, tell me about it, Locke said with a sarcastic laugh. I mean, I know I'm not, but still. I don't know if it's just because I spend so much time alone or something else, but... Huh. Locke blinked and trailed off. Struggling to find the words, his sarcastic expression fell to one of sincerity as he looked at Krepto. Krepto, you're pretty much my only friend, so I'm gonna ask you a very personal question, alright? Krepto nodded, keeping his eyes focused on the road ahead. Sure. Locke tapped the lips of his clawed fingers together as he simmered. Let's see, how do I put this? Do you ever get the feeling that something is missing from your life? Krepto raised a brow at him and smirked. What, are you asking me out on a date? First of all, that's gross. I don't roll that way. Second of all, you should at least buy me dinner first. He laughed. No, that's not what I meant. Locke shook his head and cringed at the implication. I meant that... Oh, I get it. You want a girlfriend. Well, I might be able to help you if your standards are low enough, Krepto interrupted, teasing Locke further. Locke growled and rolled his eyes. Oh, piss off. Never mind. All right. Krepto cackled and shook his head. Done joking around. What does he mean? Seriously this time. Locke took a deep breath and sighed. I mean that... I feel like there's something more out there that I'm missing. It's not money or a craft or even a special someone, but something beyond all that, you know? I feel like I'm wasting my time here. I should be doing something greater. Taking Locke seriously this time, Krepto rubbed his chin. I've already told you this a million times, but my grandmother was a mystic, and if my knowledge of them passed down to me by my mother serves me any good, you might be interested in them. The problem is getting to them. Oh, jeez, there goes the fucking dogs. Problem is getting to them. No one but themselves are allowed inside their temples, and they almost never leave. Oh, and good luck getting in there as a dude. They only take chicks for some old traditional reason. Always wondered what went on inside those temples, but no one really knows for sure. Locke pondered the thought. Well, that's not quite what I'm looking for. Locke said. I mean, no offense, but it seems the mystics don't even do anything. I mean, look around us on the street. If they live for a higher purpose, should they not be reaching out to their own people? Being esoteric isn't what I'm after. I want to change this. All of this. Bring up these poor people. Jeez Louise. Krepto rolled his eyes at Locke's hopelessness. Krepto rolled his eyes at Locke's hopeless, childlike naivety. Locke, take a step back for a moment. You're just one person, and I'm sure the mystics have their reasons for being reclusive, even if it does mean the steady decay of civilization without its principles. He looked out the driver's side window to a huge line of raggedy addicts formed outside of an alcohol store. You can't fix everything yourself. Alien or not, it'd take the power of miracles and more to make that happen. At least in our lifetime. You know as well as I do that ain't gonna stop me from trying, Locke said with a smirk. With a sigh, Krepto confessed. Yes, I know how stubborn you are, but don't come crying to me when you end up being ridiculed as a failure. Well, I may need a coach Well, I may need a couch to crash on, at the very least if the worst comes, Locke joked with a chuckle. But I've come this far on my own, and I wouldn't be so prone to say I'd fail. Better to try and maybe succeed than to never try at all, I say, boasted Locke arrogantly. I suppose... Hold on a minute, I need to let my cat in. Fucking... Okay. I'll readjust here. I suppose I could do that. I suppose I could do that. I'll be sure to keep an extra couch open for when it happens, Mr. I can do it all myself. Krepto laughed as well, pulling into the school parking lot where many other vehicles were already parked, their paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Whatever you try, my crazy black-blooded whatever you try, my crazy black-blooded friend, I'll do what I can to help you wherever you need it. Nocta smiled at him. Thanks, Crypto. With any luck, I won't need it, but it means a lot. So long as no one gets hurt, mind you. I'd be more than willing to help you on whatever crazy plan you have to save the galaxy or whatever. Crypto said, then eyeing him as he parked and shut off the car. You do have a plan, right? Uh, no, not really. Nocta rubbed his neck. Figured I'd just do as I always did and wing it until I get somewhere. It's worked so far, hasn't it? Once again, Crypto dismissively rolled his eyes and sighed. You really are going to get yourself hurt one of these days. Come on, let's get going before we're late for the ceremony. Nocta got out of the car, following Crypto into the main school building where many others already paced through the halls. Many of the faces were familiar to Nocta, but not necessarily those he'd call friends. Some were acquaintances, while most others kept their distance from him out of finding his lack of styluses and his perceptive nature to be so off-putting. Nocta did not blame them, but it was because he didn't blame them that his ostracization was made even worse. It didn't seem like a natural reaction. Even a Crypto who befriended him out of a rare pitying kindness found it odd and sometimes difficult to wrap his mind around. Nevertheless, Crypto came to enjoy his presence, mostly for his odd and somewhat naive perspective. For him, it was a nice break from the social atmosphere kept by his other friends, the typical idealization of becoming wealthy or pursuing other, more basic pleasures of life. Eclopathians' drive to reproduce was quite low due to their long lifespans, meaning that most who desired such a harem only boasted so out of social stigma placed on both young men and women, carrying over from a time when youth was much shorter. It was not but a few centuries prior to the modern day that Eclopathians still aged, until a breakthrough was discovered on how youth could be maintained forever, bypassing natural empathy. This was a time of great strife which nearly tore the UCS apart, fresh in the memories of many, and only by a slim margin did the wealthy and academic elite lose their battle to keep immortality for themselves. It was a small glimpse of hope that maybe the democratic system of the UCS could be used for good, but everywhere else Crypto looked now, he started to see that perhaps his once proud society was broken indeed. Perhaps Nocta was right in his desire, Crypto thought, but he also thought it too far gone that it'd be impossible to fix. Preferring to hold on to what good there was left for as long as possible than to radically alter the system in place. He did not share the dangerous optimism and grandiose dreams of the black-blooded, stillest-lacking Clopathian he walked beside now. Nocta noticed Crypto being oddly silent, his blue eyes distant in deep thought. Thinking about what you're going to do after graduation? Oh, no. Just something else. Crypto shook his head and looked away. Like what? Crypto waved the topic off. Oh, nothing. Oh, there goes a bit rate. And it's fine. Okay. Locta, however, gave him that all too familiar stare he had given others multiple times before, peering into Crypto's eyes with a look of careful judgment. Before Locta could say anything, however, Crypto abruptly changed the subject. I've already considered what I want to do anyways. I was thinking of following the legacy of my father, grandfather, and all the other men of my family, and join the Navy. The Navy? Locta raised the brow. Why join the Navy? We haven't had any major wars since, well, thousands of years ago. The military isn't all about fighting, Nocta, smirked Crypto. The Navy is more of a peacekeeper force in modern times, serving as a kind of intergalactic police. If anything, now would be the best time to join them. It'd be like an endless vacation, traveling the galaxy. What are you gonna do, Nocta? Nocta shrugged and scratched his head. Honestly, I don't know. Like I told you, I've just been going through life on a whim, going wherever destiny points me, I guess. Jeez, could you sound any more cheesy, prodded Crypto. You're such a nerd. Oh, shut up, Nocta rolled his eyes. The point being, I've always just trusted my instincts, but now I'm not really sure. Then again, I know they'll point me in a direction soon. How soon, Mr. Sixth Sense? Crypto joked again. Nocta shrugged. Beats me. Maybe in a few years, maybe in a few minutes. Hopefully it's something good. Push comes to shove, you can always join the military, Crypto suggested as they rounded a center at the end of the hall to the back entrance of the Coliseum. Here goes nothing. Only minutes to spare, too, he said as he pushed the metal doors open. Inside, they were greeted with a school principal who checked their ID, who checked their ID cards and then handed them silly-looking ceremonial hats and gowns to wear. Quietly, he instructed them to the stands where they would await their names be called for them to receive their certificate of graduation. Crepto, Crepto and Lacta quickly donned the gowns and, keeping their voices down, walked around back of the stands and climbed upon them, where they stood among hundreds of other students looking down to the stage at the center. Within minutes, the ceremony began. The school counselor made a quick speech congratulating the class of 25040, the current year on the UCS calendar, and when and then proceeded to read off their names in alphabetical order according to the Colorian alphabet. With each name called, each student proceeded down the stands, received their certificate on center stage, and either waited to later take a picture with their family or headed home. As Lacta looked in the crowd, however, standing on his toes in an effort to see. Okay, we're back. Do this just to make sure people know. There we go. Okay. Let's see. As if he wasn't here, not at home, and neither at work, then where in the blazing sun galaxy was he? A tightness. God. A tightness swelled and locked his chest, and anxiety and worry for his father. Crepto noticed his expression, standing right beside him, and whispered as he leaned towards his ear. Feeling nervous? God, I can't read with those dogs barking, I swear. Fucking hate them. No, it's my dad. He's not here either, murmured Lacta just above a whisper out of the corner of his mouth. Strange, said Crepto as he scanned the crowd below, sharing Lacta's worries as well. Where would the first senator be if not for here or at the Capitol? Something's not right. Then there was a muffled sound of sky car sirens flying overhead, flying over and past the school, causing many to look up and down in confusion at the noise. Something's not right indeed. Lacta took a deep breath and exhaled, his fear audible of his shaky breaths. Don't need to tell me twice. Or don't need to tell me twice. Just hope he's okay. I'm sure he'll be fine. I'll give you a ride home after we're done here, reassured Crepto, not telling Lacta how unlikely it was for police sky cars to fly over schools, least of all in a full squadron by the sounds of them. Thanks. I hope you're right, gulped Lacta. I don't know what I'd do without him. Crepto eyed Lacta, finding such a phrase odd coming from him who lived so much of his life practically on his own. His father was almost never there, and yet he felt so attached to him. It was strange, but perhaps the relief of someone loving him was the only thing keeping Lacta so hopeful and upbeat all these years in spite of his difficulties. Perhaps he felt as if Skyreath was all that he had, and he wouldn't be entirely wrong. Skyreath was the only family he had left, and possibly the only family he'd ever have, as so many others rejected him like a pariah for his bizarre condition and odd behavior. More than worrying for his friend, Crepto worried for what it meant if Skyreath, the first senator, was nowhere to be found. His father, having experience in Secret Service in the latter parts of his career, often told him what could happen if things went wrong with the UCS. Of the greatest concerns was protecting the first senator, for if anything happened to him, then the rest of the government would break down in a matter of days under its own convoluted weight. That was, unless someone was found capable of immediately stepping up and taking their place. Most past first senators had another take their place if they perished or were found unfit for the position, but Skyreath chose not to have any. Why? No one, not even Lacta, truly knew. If more police Even more police skycrawlers flew over and past the school as the ceremony went on, catching the attention of more and more in the stands. Something was wrong, very wrong, and Krepto could not help but think that Larkta's subtle yet noticeable tremble now was not without reason. He always was perceptive, after all, oftentimes to his own misfortune. The graduation ceremony stretched on for about 2 hours longer, but by this point Krepto's name had already been called and was waiting below for Lakta, with only with the only one here he truly knew no longer by his side. Lakta felt his anxiety arise even more, and Krepto's previous words didn't help him at all. He remembered this feeling, a kind of guidance or foresight, a warning of the truth. First felt when Scream cornered him in the hallway when he was 6 years old, felt it again a few times since then, and now today. Almost as if he had a guardian angel, Lakta carried through life with a sort of unknown wind guiding his sails, the winds of destiny, as he called them in his mind. It wasn't mere gut feelings or instinct, but something more external. Lakta chose to believe them most of the time, and most of the time they led him to good things. Even if they did not, there was always something truthful and meaningful when he followed them, and with meaning being more and more precious than solely in gold in this carnal era, he chose to follow them every time. He chose to have faith in them. However, now the winds of destiny blew his sails towards waters darker than the inky black blood pounding through his heart, their gentle breeze like an icy gale within him. Deeper than the marrow of his metallic bones, a frozen blade of impending doom lacerated him. Something was terrible indeed. Or something truly terrible was afoot indeed. Lockta Felthmore? The counselor announced his name at last. Lockta Gaston stood up straight, his ears perking up, and his tail whipping quickly to the left and right. He shook off the droning, anxious thoughts for fear of making a fool of himself, then proceeded down the stairs dividing the stands to the stage below. Standing in the spotlight, he took the hand of the school counselor and retrieved his rolled-up certificate of graduation. Hold on a minute, I need to deal with these dogs. There we are. Now we're back. Let's see. His tail whipping quickly to the left and right, he shook off the droning, anxious thoughts for fear of making a fool of himself, then proceeded down the stairs, dividing the stands to the stage below. Standing in the spotlight, he shook the hand of the school counselor and retrieved the roll-up certificate of graduation. And now I have to let my cat in. Again, because she always goes outside when I step outside. Never get a cat with separation anxiety. It may seem cute, but it's fucking horrible. Clingy. Okay. Out of the crowd, only one cheered for him, with a silent thumbs up in the air. Krepto. Lakta smiled half-heartedly at the gesture before stepping down the platform. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Krepto waving Lakta over to him where he stood at the back wall beside his mother and father. Careful not to trip over any tails or legs or brush his ears against anyone else's, Lakta stepped through the rows and seats towards them. As Lakta approached, he bowed his head at Krepto's parents. Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Mrodkrex. A simple hello would be fine. We ain't royalty, Lakta, chuckled Krepto's father at Lakta's oddly proper speech mannerisms. Krepto's told us about your father going missing, and he wants to know if you want him to give you a ride home, said Krepto's mother. Lakta glanced at Mrs. Mrodkrex, then nodded at Krepto. Sure, if it's not too much trouble. I don't want to intervene with family matters. It's fine, go ahead, shrugged Krepto's father. Just be careful going down highway... Hold on. A slight ringing came from the communication device at Mr. Mrodkrek's hip. Interrupting him, he picked it up, putting a fold-out headset on his right ear, then spoke into the small device. Hello? What? You can't be serious, he gasped. Lakta and Krepto eyed Mr. Mrodkrex as he fearfully listened to the voice of whoever was on the line. Mrs. Mrodkrex was too busy was also stricken with worry. Crypto's father cupped his hand over his mouth, with dread in his eyes, occasionally glancing at Locke as he nodded. Yes, sir. No, sir. We aren't. We aren't and haven't been for 25,000 years. Are you saying that... Dear Creator. Give me a second, please, sir. He held his hand over the receiver and spoke to Locke and Crypto. Crypto, take Locke straight home, now. No detours, no shortcuts, no stops whatsoever. Keep the radio off, the windows up, and doors locked. No matter what you see, you need to take Locke straight home and keep him safe until your mother gets there. Don't answer the door to anyone else. Got it? Yes, Dad. What's wrong? Crypto asked, his fur standing on end and his ears cowering back. Mr. Rodcrick shook his head and waved him off. Just go quickly and stay safe. All right, nodded Crypto, afraid and confused at what was going on. And when he turned to Locke, he wasn't alone in this feeling. Come on, let's go. Hurry. Locked his mouth. His mouth went dry, silenced by his own rising panic, his father going missing, Crypto's father receiving a strange and foreboding call. The squadrons of police sky cars flying over the school, a storm brewed and its thunder called his name. He followed Crypto out of the school, back to the parking lot, and sat inside Crypto's vehicle. Crypto hastily started up the engine as they both buckled in and reversed out of the lot before rapidly accelerating out onto the main road leading away from the school. Well, now that graduation's all said and done, now what? Crypto asked, trying to keep the mood light. Locta, however, saw through it. He could practically taste it in the air, like one could sense the changing of the seasons. He was silent, already knowing that something terrible had happened. They drove along the roads, Crypto heeding his father's instructions to go straight to Locta's home. But then they were met with an obstruction. Traffic was being redirected off the main roads by a roadblock of police vehicles towards inner city. What in the... This road's never blocked off, Crypto scoffed as he turned the wheel and followed the rest of traffic. They proceeded further and further towards the heart of inner city, nearing the capital, and the anxiety within Locta soon turned to terror. Not only were the security forces swarming about the city, but also giant warships roared through the sky, blotting out the sun. Supercarriers, looking roughly like a sideways pen with two great swept wings attached at either side. The last time Clepathian supercarriers flew over the skies of Chelor was in the primordial conflicts, and during the time of war. A dense roadblock encircled the grounds of the Capitol building, police rushing and shoving both media and rioters away as sirens blared over the shouts in the air. Locta grabbed his ears and as his eyes went wide, darting left and right as he broke into a sudden cold wet, panting and quick, gasping breaths. Stop! Stop! Stop the car! He suddenly shouted. Crypto slammed on the brakes and swerved to the side of the curb. Locta suddenly bolted out of the vehicle. Locta, wait! Where are you going? Crypto called out after him, but Locta was already gone. Damn it! Crypto slammed his fist on the steering wheel, unbuckling himself and stepping out of the car as well. He shut his door in the one Locta had left open before running to catch up with him through the crowd, only to find Locta trying to wrestle his way through the police blockade. Let me through! Please! I'm Skyreath's son, Locta Felthmore! Locta pleaded desperately, standing on his toes and climbing through the cloud to see what events transpired beyond them. Get back, citizen! Go home! An officer spat into his face. Crypto finally caught up with Locta and grabbed his hand. Locta, come on! No! I can't! That's my dad! His forceful pushing weakened as he saw the medical response team carrying a stretcher with a tarp-covered body on top of it, the tail protruding out from beneath it, having the same cap design as Skyreath's. Crypto's fur stood on end as time seemed to freeze for a moment. We need to go, Locta. It's not safe for you here. Crypto shook his head and shouted over the crowd as some of them were starting to recognize Locta as Skyreath's son. Now, Locta! Grabbing Locta by the wrist, Crypto jerked Locta back and forced him to run with him. Both of them suddenly scurried inside and quickly locked the doors, many of the rioters chasing after the car and throwing bottles, bricks, and other objects as Crypto slammed his foot down on the accelerator pedal. With a roar of the engine, they sped out of inner city as Locta continued to pant in his panic, eyes teared over yet wide, pupils narrow as hairs, his hands shaking at the inability to comprehend the innocence being ripped out of him by the second now. Eventually, they made it into the small, quiet neighborhood where Locta's home resided, empty. Crypto pulled into the garage and turned off the car's engine, engaging the parking brake before unbuckling himself. He reached over and touched Locta's shoulder. Hey, come on, let's get you inside, he urged, trying to hide his own panic. Locta sat as the very definition of shock, trembling and whimpering after what he saw, what he knew. He's gone. Family is gone. No, maybe that was someone else. We don't know yet. Crypto attempted to reassure him. Locke slowly turned his head and stared Crypto in the eyes with black tears streaming down his face. I know who it was, Crypto. I could see it. I feel it. This time I am not playing games. Crypto gulped and leaned back in his seat with a sigh. A moment of silence passed between them before Crypto spoke again. I know it may seem like I never believed, always joking about you being some kind of alien, but truth be told, I've always believed you were special, if it's any consolation now. Locke blinked, looking up at Crypto with a soft, mildly surprised stare. You did? I admit for a long time I was skeptical, but as I stay around you more and more, as I study more of my grandmother's writings and books, I sometimes wonder if there are individuals among us who are different, confessed Crypto with a gulp, eyes forward and blank. Most of the galaxy may no longer believe in a creator, virtues, or sins, but the majority isn't always right. Then, what am I? Locke looked at his hands. Crypto hesitated, stared at him, and shook his head. I don't know, but I do know who you are. You are my closest friend, Locke. I care a lot about you, as much as I might tease. No matter who or what you are or will be, no matter what happens from here to our graves, I'll be here for you when you need me. That's a promise, okay? Don't forget that. Thank you, Crypto. I just hope I don't hurt you along the way from my own stupidity, sobbed Locke, calming down just enough to speak coherently. Crypto found such a confession coming from Locke's usually arrogant mouth to be rather enlightening. He knew that his friend felt vulnerable and confused now, losing everything when he thought he had it all. Come on, let's get you inside. There's a lot of people miffed at your father for undue reasons, and they'll be upset at you by association. Crypto patted Locke's shoulder before opening the door and exiting the car. Locke exited as well, proceeding inside the house through the garage side entrance. The interior was as Locke left it, dark with all the lights turned off. Crypto turned on one and was pleasantly surprised at how tidy the place was, even though most teenagers and young men all Crypto turned on one and was presently surprised at how tidy the place was, even though most young teenagers and young men left alone often neglected their living space. Locke truly was strange, never ceasing to raise a brow on Crypto's face. Crypto did not lie when he confessed his belief that Locke may not even be Clepathian. That begged the question, however. What was he aside from a small, stubborn, and sheltered individual with a strange birth defect? He read subtle mentions of black blood in his grandmother's mystic tomes, speaking of some forlorn individual and many vague poems and rhymes, difficult for Crypto's skeptical mind to understand. What he did understand from the text, however, was that black was a symbol for sacrifice, a curse for a blessing. Perhaps it was nothing but an ancient people's attempt at understanding the universe around them, as many myths and ancient religions were taught to be nowadays. But now Crypto wasn't so certain of what was taught by modern scholars to be true. He was especially doubtful of them when there was one who defied them standing right before him. His condition, his black blood, and lack of stoicism still baffled doctors as something that should not have even been possible. His perception seemed almost supernatural, but Crypto knew he could easily do more harm than good by feeding Locke to potential delusions of being something he was not. Perhaps he was a biological oddity, mentally shaped by a childhood of isolation, but Crypto had no proof one way or the other. What he did have proof of, however, was that Locke needed someone to stand beside him, lest he become shattered and broken like the lowly wretches injecting themselves with deadly euphoria-inducing drugs. His mother always said to be there for those who could not be there for themselves, and that was precisely what Crypto did now as he accompanied Locke into his living room. Whether he liked it or not, this was what was best for him, Crypto believed. Locke picked up the holovision remote and looked at Crypto. Crypto held up his hand to halt him. Now, Locke, you know what you may not see what you... Now, you know you may not want to see what you will find if you push that power button. Crypto, I have to know for sure. I've lived in my head for too long. I need to see reality with my own eyes, he said with a gulp. He moved his clawed thumb over the red power button and flicked the projector display on. A full-color three-dimensional display of a newscast appeared in the air from the projector. Almost immediately, Locke's heart sank as he saw the headline across the top of the display. First Senator Skyreath Felthmore assassinated by alien life form. War declared. Fleets mobilized for the first time in 25,000 years. Locke fell to his knees and clutched at his chest, wailing in tremendous sorrow. No! No, Dad, no! Tears poured like rain from his eyes, a torrent of misery and regret. Krepto cupped his hand over his mouth agape, stricken with almost as much as Locke by the terrible news. He looked down at Locke, who so bitterly cried out with a heart of pain and misery. I'm sorry, he cried out at Locke at the display, droplets of tears staining his clothes and the floor back. Sorry for being such a defect. I'm sorry, please. In vain, Krepto tried to console him. Locke, don't say that, you're not a— I am! Locke glared daggers and screamed at Krepto. If it weren't for me being such a deadweight to him, such a failure of a son, then maybe he'd still be alive. Locke whimpered. You can't blame yourself for this. It isn't your fault. Krepto exclaimed. Leave me alone, Krepto. Please. I deserve nothing more. Locke pleaded, so exposed and vulnerable in front of Krepto. It was clear that Locke did not care nor want to hear reason in his overwhelming tsunami of misery. Krepto wanted to say or do something to help. He wanted to stay by his friend's side and offer aid that he so clearly needed, but Krepto was not in the right place to assert himself. He did not know such loss, so he held his tongue on the matter for now, and let Locke be. I'll be waiting outside if you need me. Krepto nodded and left the room, leaving Locke alone as he wanted. Locke's father was the only family he had, the sole ray of light in a dying galaxy, keeping his hope strong, thick through thick and thin, and now he was alone. His innocence, his naivety, his childish outlook, all torn, wounded, and shattered to pieces in an instant like a crack of lightning impaling through his weeping, shredded heart. Locke was broken and fragmented, a pillar once standing so high being reduced to ash and ruin. Nearly an hour of whimpering and wailing later, Locke's overwhelming emotion faded, but the sun did not return. All that was left scabbing over his wounded psyche was a yawning gray hole of emptiness and guilt. Suddenly, the reality seemed so colorless. Somehow he knew he was at fault for this. It didn't make sense, neither to him nor Krepto, but he could feel the wind blowing upon his soul that somehow he was at fault for this, and he had to correct it. He had to make things right. Locke looked up at the headline on the news again, reading it over and over through his watery eyes. He peered at the words, war declared, war declared, war declared. They recited in his mind, war, battle, blood, fear, vengeance. He remembered Krepto's earlier words, where he spoke of joining the military, and though Locke once rejected such an offer, he saw it as a potential means to satiate this blossoming desire for retribution within him. Alas, he looked down at his arms, tears wetting his charcoal-black needle-like fur, and was reminded he had no styluses. He was a cornered beast with no teeth. His anger would not wait. His desire for vengeance, no, justice, would not be abated by such a curse. Already plans began to brood in Locke's mind, but these thoughts were not strangers to him. Indeed, he felt almost as if they weren't new ideas, but distant memories that he had always known, as if he already knew this desire for justice before. As if he already knew war. Alright, that was chapter 6. Sorry for the interruptions and connection drop during that. It was, hopefully that doesn't split the VOD. It doesn't look like it will, but, things are what they are. Hopefully everybody's still having a nice comfy time. Hello, Dr. Derper. Enjoy your cup of coffee again. And my cup of coffee is empty, sadly, but we'll make do without. I'm getting a bit more used to reading live. Take a deep breath, stretch, look away from the screen for a little bit. Blink. Alright. Okay, we're good. Locke found it difficult Chapter 7, Ashes to Dust. Locke found it difficult to sleep through the night following his father's assassination, tossing and turning in frustration and misery. Through his constant lapses in and out of consciousness, waking up and sobbing fits and having nightmares of death and regret in between, hours passed gruelingly slow until the next morning finally chewed away the night. Locto woke from his half-asleep stupor at the sound of someone knocking on the door, tired as if he hadn't slept at all. How are you, Locto? I'm doing fairly well. A little lightheaded, but I'll be okay. Wrapped in a mess of tear and sweat-drenched blankets and sheets, his ears twitched up in reflex at the sound, but he didn't want to get up. He just wanted to lay there forever and never wake up. But as knocking grew louder and louder, his conscious mind became clearer, and so did his newfound bitterness. He peeled himself off the bed and trudged down the hall towards the corridor between the living room and dining room, then opened the door. There, standing before him, he saw someone from the Capitol, dressed in secret agency uniform with his hat removed in a respectful gesture. Locke Felthmore? He asked. His fur unkempt and uncleaned as a rodent's nest, Locke stared up at the agent, with one eyelid open more than the other, and spoke. Yeah? He questioned bluntly. Krepto, who had stayed over and slept on the living room couch in case Locke needed anything, was now awake as well, as he heard the conversation. The agent responded to Locke. You have my deepest sympathies regarding your father. I'm sure it goes without saying that he was a hard-working man who did the best for all of us. His funeral service will be held today in Majesty Park in 3 hours. Oh, he gulped and looked down. I'll be there, Locke said weakly with a sniffle. The agent reached into his jacket pocket and handed Locke a folded piece of paper. We also found this on his person, for your eyes only, as it seems. Locke blinked at the note and looked up at the agent curiously before taking the piece of paper sealed in candle wax. Thank you. If that's all, I'd like to be alone. With a silent bow of his head, the agent turned and departed the Felthmore household. Locke closed the door, staring at the folded paper in his hands as he proceeded into the dining area where he used to spend many nights of his early childhood playing board games with his father and his father's friends. What was once so colorful was now washed out in the light of gray skies, as if the world itself were mourning with Locke. With a sigh, he sat down at the dining room table and read outside. With a sigh, he sat down at the dining room table and read the outside of the paper in the colorless light pouring through the window from the cloudy day outside. To my son, Locke Felthmore, it read. Locke used the sharp tips of his claw-like fingers to perforate the wax seals and unfold the note, reading its contents as if Skyreath's voice were speaking in his mind. If you're reading this, then I am already gone. Where or when, none of us can tell, but do know that this was not unforeseen. I only wish I could have spent more time with you, shaping you into the strong individual I know you can be, but fate had long decided 12 years ago that it was not to be. No doubt you've seen the news. Our people are at war with my murderers, a species of aliens which have been stalking us and watching us from the shadows for eons. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I also know that you are an unbelievable sort as well. After all, I gave you your name for a reason. Locke Felthmore, our ancestor, brought peace and hope to our broken people in a time of strife thousands of years ago. Our lineage is a lineage of greatness that begins, and perhaps ends, with you. Perhaps we'll see each other again in the far future, and when that happens, I anticipate my boy with open arms. Our people's future is no longer my burden to bear, but yours. Make me proud, my son. Bring our people through this chaotic time and into a future I know you can. From wherever or whenever I am, I'll be watching you, and when the time is right, we will see each other again. And I know you will not disappoint me. With hope and promise, Skyreath Felthmore. With his eyes tearing up once again, Locke closed them, and now bit his lips as he sniffled. He folded the noting up and cradled his head in his hands. But how, Father? Why did you leave if you knew? He shook his head, confused at the note. How could his father just go so willingly? How did he already know what was going to happen to him, promising to see him again? What did he mean what do you mean if he was already dead? Something wasn't right here. All of this happening so fast and sweeping him along. Locke always did feel as if he were meant for something greater than himself, but now, when he had the opportunity to do so, now with his life in his hands, and his alone, with his naivety no longer blinding him, he was hesitant, cowardly. So long had he been sheltered by the steady knowledge that he'd always have his father there for him when he fell, but now, in a flash of lightning, he was his own man, his own destiny. Skyreath Skyreath wrote that he named. Skyreath wrote that he was named after a great conqueror of old, an ancestor whose name he carried alone. He was the last of the Felthmore line, and its legacy was now entirely in his hands. So much responsibility, so much weight as if an anvil were suddenly dropped upon his back from the tallest mountain on Chelor. Crushing, overwhelming, but also liberating. No longer was he bound by the shackles of what was expected from him. Now it was his time to shine, his time to bring forth his vision. Yes, that was it. Maybe he could prove he was not weak, not a failure, not a defect. He only hoped that his father's trust in him was well placed. Then again, what was the alternative? Would he live here and rot out the remainder of his days, fading into obscurity? Or would he look to the stars and arise to their level, or at least die trying? He had no plans, no goals, no knowledge at all of how to get there or what to expect. Locta was neither particularly strong in body nor wise in mind, and he didn't even have Stylluses to fight with. But he did have one small gift in this depraved galaxy. He had the winds of destiny, his perception guiding him. He chose to believe, but belief alone was not enough. Belief alone that everything would be all right did not stop his father from being murdered. He clenched his fists, but then relaxed them, looking out the kitchen window. His perception and sixth sense alone would not be enough, he knew, but an uninformed mind could learn, and a weak body could be trained. All he needed was the will, and with nothing left to lose, the will to fight was so easy to find. His eyes shifted to the right, looking out a window into the backyard where the smithy rested, plans churning in his mind. His thoughts were put on pause when he heard the heavy, thumping steps of another Clopathian enter the room. Nocta looked over his shoulder to see Crepto standing there. I heard your conversation at the door. I can give you a ride to Majesty Park if you need it. Thanks, Crepto. Locta smiled weakly. Crepto nodded and turned to leave Locta alone, but then Locta halted him. Oh, Crepto, about last night. I'm sorry for shoving you away like that. I just felt so... It doesn't matter what I say, it's inexcusable. I never meant to hurt you, I just... Took a deep breath and exhaled. I'm sorry, is all. Crepto shook his head and smiled. Don't worry, Locta. You're under a lot of stress, and we all make poor decisions when we're upset. The last thing you need right now is to feel guilty. Together, as friends do, we'll get through this. He spoke with hope through his tired, emotionally distressed. He spoke with hope to his tired, emotionally distressed friend. That begs another question. The UCS is at war now. Are you still planning on joining the military? Of course I am. If anything, it's all the more reason to do so. I want to make those scaly green bastards pay for what kind of chaos they threw us into. What they did to you. Crypto spoke with determination. Locta nodded. Think I may wish to take up your suggestion from yesterday. Those things murdered the only family I have, and it's only right that I repay them in kind, he said with a hateful, distant glare ahead. Whoa, slow down. Crypto held his hands out in front of him. Joining the army, especially in times of war, is not a simple decision to make. I've been thinking over it for the past few years before I made my decisions. It's not just a one-time job, but a dedication. Besides, you don't even have Stylluses to be infantry, and neither the academic prerequisites to become a pilot or gunner aboard a starship. The best you could hope for is a non-combat role, and I know that's not what you want by the anger I see in you. Locta held the folded note in his hands, looking Crepto straight in the eyes. No. I know what I want. What my father always wanted from me. I want to live up to my name, and this is my only chance. As for not having Stylluses, Locta's eyes shifted out the window to the forge in the backyard once more. I think I can remedy that. Crepto gulped and then nodded, before stepping away. He didn't like the idea of Locta, someone so emotionally addled and so seemingly vulnerable, making an impulsive decision. But who was he to tell him no? Who was he to deny someone who lost everything what they desired? While the military life often reshaped and reforged individuals, hammering them into a disciplined machine while attempting to bring out the best in them, so perhaps it could be a good thing for Locta to join. That, or Locta's naivety, had rubbed off on him. Locta soon stood up from the table and walked back to his room as he gathered a set of... Locta soon stood up from the table and walked back into his room as to gather a set of clothes for the day ahead. Unfortunately, he didn't have any formal wear for the funeral ahead, only casual pants, belt, shirts, and a couple of coats. He did remember his father was about the same size and build as him, though, and he had many pieces of formal wear given his occupation. Locke looked down the long hall in the direction of Skyreath's room, standing still with a fearful hesitation. It felt almost like he would be defiling a corpse by going there and disturbing the belongings of one so recently lost. But then he thought of the oddly written note his father left him. What he wondered now was why he went missing for the entire day prior to his death. Where was he? What was he doing? The signs along the road Locke had now traveled already didn't make sense. The pieces of the puzzle still didn't add up. Then again, they never truly did they? Never once did he truly feel as if all were well, having this faint sense that some greater piece was missing from the whole. For so long, he often lapsed into the suspicion that it was simply him missing his mother, or his father being absent all the time, maybe his lack of stillnesses, but now he knew it was not true. No longer obscured by student responsibilities or sunny hopes blinding him to reality, the overwhelming emptiness he felt offered clarity, reflection in ways he never felt before. After the emotional outburst earlier, all he felt now were traces of sorrow, fear, and anger in a vast sea of nothingness. This void, it needed to be filled, for he could not survive this way, no more than fire could burn without fuel. Though it was tempting to simply lay down and sleep forever now, Locke knew that this was not the son he was meant to be. Like trying to kindle a fire in a rainstorm, Locke forced himself forward, trusting in the small hope that this life was far from over yet. There was still so much room ahead for things to change, and given the choice between fading into obscurity or perhaps fulfilling his father's dreams and finding his purpose, he chose the latter. He chose to have faith. Faith in what? He knew not entirely, but it was faith in the winds of destiny which carried him this far. Where they blew him, he could never tell until he arrived. Thus he set his sails for unknown horizons. But this time the seas were far from calm. Maybe, along the way, he would find the nature of these winds, and truths to bring light to his darkened and confused young mind, but it was ultimately up to him to walk the path. Thus, heeding his faith and hope, he pushed aside his nagging doubts and walked down the hallway to his father's room. A slight squeak came from the hinges as he slowly opened the door, peeking inside to see that it was just as his father left it. Locke entered the room and opened the closet where many suits hung. Careful not to step on or trip over anything, he filed through the formal clothes, searching for one appropriate for the occasion. When he found the garments, he pulled it out of the closet, but as he did, he noticed something fall out of its pockets onto the floor. Curious, Locke paused and looked down at the folded piece of torn paper on the carpeted floor between his feet. Looking left and right to make sure no one was watching, he stooped down and picked it up before walking over to Skyreath's bed and sitting on it. On the back of the note, there was a strange stamped glyph, looking like a circle with two stylized triangles on either side. In a way, it looked like a vague outline of a Clepathian's head and ears, but Locke had never seen this symbol before. He opened the note and read its short, simple contents. Reminder, meet Pride tomorrow for final meeting. Next day will be for action. Ask Pride about Locke and the aliens while there. Don't give up yet. You're too close. Nothing can stop you now. Locke blinked in confusion. Pride? Who was Pride? His father was often secretive about his friends for reasons Locke never truly understood. All of a sudden, he heard Krepto's voice speaking to him from the doorway. What are you doing in here? Oh, Locke quickly hid the note under his thigh, startled by Krepto's intrusion. I'm getting ready for the, funeral. Locke forced out the words. I don't have any appropriate wear, so I thought I'd use one of my dad's suits. Krepto nodded. All right, just checking up on you. You want anything to eat? I know you're not feeling well, but I'm fine, Krepto. Thank you. Locke interrupted him dismissively. Oh, excuse me. Let me take a sip of water here. Okay, mind you, we still have about an hour. We still have about an hour with Majesty Park being a couple hours away, so if you change your mind, I'll be in the living room, said Krepto before stepping out of the room. Hydrate? Alright, we'll do it again. And stretch? You got it. Oh boy, I feel if I do reading streams in the future, I'll probably cut them a little shorter. You know, this is a bit more winding than I thought it'd be. Let's see. Locked aside and held the note out before him once more, staring at the strange stamp upon it, wondering about the meaning of its contents. He shook his head and put the note aside on the nightstand near a picture of Locta's mother, her jeweled necklace hanging around it. It was a gift from Skyreath to her, a large sapphire sphere with a black Felthmore family seal within, fixated upon a silvery chain. Gemstones that were once precious many thousands of years ago were no longer of extraordinarily high value, allowing for such large stones. Their value in modern times came from the name of the jewel crafter rather than the jewel itself. Nocta took the necklace and carefully stuffed it into the pocket of the suit's coat. It only felt right to bring such a sentimental possession back to his father. Excuse me. Maybe I shouldn't have eaten some sausages for breakfast. It's kind of reminding me of it now. Locta then stood up and made his way to the bathroom to clean himself up for the day, spending quite some time in the shower as he ruminated on the life ahead of him. With his family gone, all he had left was himself and Krepto. Krepto meant well, Locta knew, but Krepto was also his own man, with his own goals and responsibilities. Locta could not live solely by Krepto's support, for he too was his own man now. Locta's stubborn drive for self-sufficiency was so easy to see through now, with how much of a mess he was upon his father's death. He knew Krepto saw through it, but Locta didn't want to believe he did. Krepto was giving and willing to go the extra mile, but though Locta appreciated his help, deep inside he didn't like relying on someone so much. Why Krepto stuck around, Locta didn't quite know, especially in the knowledge that Krepto had other, less defective friends. It felt as if Krepto were trying to prove something to him, showing Locta his own weakness. But when Locta looked within him, with his uncanny perception, he saw no malicious intent. It baffled Locta how Krepto attacked his weakness in such a way, yet meant no harm. Krepto knew Locta well, extremely well, and saw something within Locta that Locta refused to see in himself, out of desire for something greater. Just how small he was. After nearly an hour in the shower, Locta finally turned off the water and dried himself. The fur of a matured Clepathian was stiff, almost like countless tiny slick needles, in contrast to the softer fur of a child. This made it much easier to dry off and less irritable for loose-fitting clothes, unlike the snug wraps and tunic Locta and all other Clepathians wore in their early years. He put on the suit piece by piece, finding it somewhat loose, but otherwise fitting. He looked in the mirror. When he looked in the mirror, he appeared almost exactly like his father. Stared at himself for a moment. "I'll finish what you started, Father," Locta quietly swore in front of the mirror. "I'll bring our people back to the light and avenge what was done to you. I may not have weapons to fight, but I do have a will, and weapons can be forged. You gave me a name, and I'll be damned if I forsake it." Locta then stepped out of the bathroom, groomed and suited up, finding Krepto sitting on the couch. Krepto blinked in astonishment at Locta's appearance, thinking it was Skyreath at first if it weren't for the ear stripes and tail cap. Krepto stood up and made sure his keys were still at his hip. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Ready as I'll ever be, I guess," said Locta with a dismal gaze at the floor. "Let's get going, then," Krepto said, leading the way towards the garage door where his car sat. Both of them entered the vehicle and buckled in, Krepto staring at the vehicle and pulling out onto the street. Krepto was tempted to turn on the radio to hear the news about how the UCS government was handling the lack of a first senator who his replacement would be, but knew that the last thing Locta probably wanted to hear was more talk of his father's death. The drive was thus silent, Krepto with his eyes on the road, and Locta with his eyes on the bleak, cloudy skies above. How fitting, Krepto thought, that the weather was so poor. Coincidental as it may have been, he did find it morbidly amusing. More and more had Krepto been reading his grandmother's mystic tomes, how they often spoke of a kind of synchronicity in all things. The mystics did not believe in coincidence, holding that all things occurred, existed, and ceased to exist for reason, be it grandiose or minor. Krepto wondered, then, what this horrible tragedy meant. What was its purpose? Though Locta felt it the worst, The entirety of all Carpathians were already beginning to reel in the backlash of the first senator's death. As they drove down the streets, many shops and houses had been broken into the day prior, and looted, showing just how on the brink the UCS was to societal collapse. Clopathians were a warring, violent, and dangerously proud people at heart. For a time they suppressed this and ruled themselves, but as generations pass, nature slowly reclaimed them. History repeated, and Crypto feared if he would be among those to witness the fall of a civilization, and whether it would be the final of the many times Clopathian civilization had consumed itself before. The longer they lived, the longer these civilizations lasted. The longer they lived, the longer these civilizations lasted, but even the biologically immortal did not live forever. The universe was a dangerous place, filled with hostilities both of nature and of themselves, sentient beings. These aliens, as Crypto had learned from watching the holovision into the night prior, were elusive and cunning, appearing almost out of thin air. Worlds and starships which had never been there before suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But why? Was it an ancient grudge from the primordial conflicts when the Clopathians fended off an extragalactic invasion? Had they been biding all this time for a sudden reprisal when the UCS was at its most unstable? Or was there a different, greater reason behind the sudden attack? To hold a grudge for so long seemed unthinkable, so there had to be some other reason why a sentient, intelligent species would so suddenly attack them. It all seemed so fishy to Crypto. Now that his now that now that his mind had been opened by his grandmother's captivating writings and tomes, so easily could it have been that the aliens simply thought in ways a Clopathian and so, so easily could it have been that aliens simply thought in ways a Clopathian would never understand, and vice versa, but he wasn't satisfied with that. He didn't want to believe that. Maybe just as desperate for an answer to a puzzle as he was too small. Maybe he was just desperate for an answer to a puzzle he was too small to solve. All he knew was that he was Crypto Mrodkrix, a citizen of the UCS, and soon to be soldier in the UCS Navy. If he was to fight, then he would fight for what he knew, his people, and the parts of the UCS worth preserving. For when one ventured too far into the unknown, they could easily find themselves lost forever. So too would he try to keep his friend, Lakta, grounded as he kept himself. For the more he read in mystic inscriptions about those whose veins ran black, the more he worried about the future to come. Lakta possessed a noble heart, but Crypto knew him long enough to see just how vulnerable Lakta truly was, if not to others, then to his own stubbornness. Whether he liked it or not, he needed Crypto's help, and Crypto knew that Lakta would. And Crypto knew that Lakta knew it deep down. The unanswered question was in whether or not Lakta would embrace this. For that, Crypto was less optimistic, but he would do what any good citizen of the UCS would do and provide what was best for Lakta. At least, what he thought was best. Both of them were shooting in the dark now. The silence between Crypto and Lakta continued 2 full hours, all the way until they finally arrived at Majesty Park, a large natural garden within an inner city. Many green hedges and exotic, colorful flowers painted a beautiful landscape in stark contrast to the dreary skies above and the jungle of gray steel around it. The parking lot outside of it was almost empty, almost entirely empty. Only those who Skyreath knew in life as friends or trusted acquaintances were invited. Lakta and Crypto stepped out of the car after shutting it off, looking down before walking across the lot towards the front barred gates. Normally, Majesty Park was open to the public all hours of Normally, Majesty Park was open to the public all hours of all days, but today it was closed to a select few. As Lakta and Crypto approached the gate, they were halted by 2 guards standing at its entrance. "Hold. He can come, but you have to stay outside, I'm afraid," they said to Crypto. The guards had most peculiar uniform, neither Crypto nor Lakta had seen before. A black robe beneath gleaming bronze armored plates. Both of them figured it was some sort of funeral garb given its coloration. "I understand," Crypto nodded, then looked at Lakta. "I'll be waiting in the car for when you're done." "You sure? It might be a while," Lakta questioned. With a slight, sympathetic smile, Crypto reassured him. "I'll be fine. Now go. Be with your father." Locta took a deep breath and exhaled, resisting the urge to break down yet again. Thank you, Crypto. It means a lot to me. It's what friends do. I'm here for you. Crypto pat his shoulder before turning and walking back to the hovering ground car. Locta watched a few seconds as his friend walked away, then turned to enter Majesty Park. Alone now, he followed the trail of the black-robed guards posted along the main path leading to the center. It was at the center of the park where the departure service was held, at the base of an ancient marble statue of Clepathians holding up a flagpost together, facing towards where the sun rose in the west. Atop the pole was the blue and black UCS banner. Around its base were the ancient banners of past nations on Chelor, the colonial banner, the Calorian oligarchy, the Rattan Republic, and the Clepathian Empire. Nocta paused for a moment as he saw the Clepathian Empire's banner preserved beneath, a transparent glass cover within the stone, seeming oddly reminiscent of the stamp on the note from the pocket of the suit he now wore. He thought little of it at the time, proceeding to find his seat among the few dozen others attending the funeral. Skirthy was there, as was Landil. In fact, almost all of them were Skyreath's closest friends, and no one else knew. In fact, almost all of them were Skyreath's closest friends, and no one else. Before Locta sat down in a seat at the front, he noticed an odd-looking figure sitting all the way in the back row by himself. He was dressed in the garments of a first senator, but also wore a strange white mask covering all but one eye on his face, and when he saw Locta staring at him, he waved at him to come over. Locta cautiously approached this figure in white mask, who stood up to greet him at almost eye level. Locta looked into his one visible eye. Seeing that it was a most unnatural dull red. The stripes on his ears were also odd, staggered and slanted as opposed to being straight and vertical, but his eye, the mask, and ears were hardly as odd as when he spoke. Locta Felthmore, I presume? He questioned, his voice sounding mechanical and modulated through the speaker of his mask. Yes, Mr. Locta responded nervously. Keltethys, said the figure. My appearance does not disturb you, does it? Pardon my facial injuries. Locta shook his head in denial. No, not at all. Are you my father's, Locta gulped. Replacement? Keltethys nodded solemnly. It is an unfortunate fact, but I am. I will not trouble you further, simply wishing to give you my deepest sympathies, because I, too, know what it's like to lose someone. He peered at Locta. If that's all, then, see you, Keltethys. Locta awkwardly excused himself, pacing quickly back to his seat and checking over his shoulder at Keltethys. What an odd, disturbing figure, Locta thought. He had never heard of anyone by the name of Keltethys, and neither had he ever met someone who wore such a mask. Locta didn't know whether it was just his foul mood, the robotic sound of his voice, or something else, but Keltethys stirred ominous feelings within him. Though he was normally quick to forgive and quick to trust, Keltethys was far too unknown, far too convenient for the time and place. It was as if he just popped out of nowhere to take Skyreath's place. Nevertheless, Locta knew too little about him to start throwing accusations and suspicions upon him, but he could not deny this unsettling aura radiating from that white-masked figure. Soon the departure service began with a very rare sight, a mystic stepping up an escort with a closed, polished wood casket being carried by 4 undertakers. Locta's eyes widened in awe at the mystic, her silken robes woven in intricate, exotic patterns in the shades of purple, blue, and white. The hood over her head, veiling her eyes beneath the shadow, was crested with a violent crown, and she held a large, strange book in her hands, engraved with symbols Locta had never seen before. After the casket was placed upon the stone base of the statue, she opened the book upon the pulpit and spoke clearly, yet softly. To him laying now in peace we gather today, in honor of a soul soon to transcend from this flawed world to the perfection of above. A great tragedy has befallen not just Skyreath Felthmore, but all our people as the drums of war thunder once more. But even as our troops march, let it not be forgotten what Skyreath lived for, and died for, her silken voice preached. Here lies a man who carried the weight of all of us, small and grand, weak and strong, so that we may live in happiness and harmony. Let his life be an inspiration for all of us here today, remembering him for all the good he has done. and forgiving him for his trespasses. As mortals, none of us are perfect in this flawed universe, but in the arms of the Creator, our Father of all, guiding us from above, we are taken and made whole. Though this may be the end of Skyreath Felthmore in this life, a new life of eternal splendor and peace may yet await him beyond. Carefully spoke the mystic. Oh, thanks for the hydrate and stretch, and hello, Onward. I see you. Mm. 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 Not staying long, tired. Understandable. Hope you have a good rest soon. I'm about to end here in pretty soon anyways. I think I'll probably end it after this chapter. Seems a good stopping point. The mystic then turned and faced the casket, close to where none could see the body within, and continued. Through the water of the womb we all enter this world, but through fire we shall leave it. Let the fires of purgation cleanse the illnesses upon the soul, so that Skyreath Felthmore may be free and pure at last. Ashes to dust, and dust to wind eternal. Good God, those dogs. Hold on a minute. I have no idea why they do that. Howling fits. Thank goodness for the mute button on the microphone. Let's see. When eternal. She expanded her hands out by her side, and from her open palms glowed bright flames. Locked aghast at the strange sight of the flame conjuring from thin air. But as he looked around in shock, no one else seemed fazed by the sight. All of the few here acted like they'd seen it before, expecting the bizarre display unfolding right before Locta's eyes. From the mystic's hands, the castic enveloped in flame, instantly cremating it and the body within, and its ashes poured into a small bronze jar. The jar was taken by the mystic, who carried it to Locta, handing it to him. Locta stared up in awe at her, unsure whether to be afraid or amazed, and she stared down at him with a look of concern, fear. She glanced left and right, opening her mouth as if she wanted to say something to him, but then a guard coughed from behind her and caught her attention. She looked back at the guard, who eyed her with a watchful, hawk-like glare, and thus she said nothing, merely swallowing her potential words and proceeding back to the pulpit. She cleared her throat, sounding faintly nervous as she now spoke. Thus ends the passing of Skyreath Felthmore. May we remember him forever and ever. Ashes to dust, and dust to wind eternal. The mystic closed her book and took it with her as she was escorted out by the guards. The others attending the funeral arose and began to depart, except for Locta and Caltethis. Locta sat with the jar of ashes in his arms, speechless at what he just witnessed from the mystic, too terrified to move, with Caltethis' eye bearing down upon him. His heartbeat arose faster and faster, feeling a threatening, lingering doom suddenly encroaching upon him. It grew and grew, his breath shortened, and just when he thought he'd feel Caltethis' hands around his throat, he left. Caltethis simply stood up, unfolded his cane from beneath his coat, and left. And that'll probably be where we end it for today. Next time I continue this, if I continue the readings in the future, I'm not sure. It depends on what you guys think of it, I guess. Feedback is, I guess, appreciated, and whether you like it or not. There are places to post that, Discord and whatnot. That is where we'll end it here. Let's see, who are we gonna write out to? Something experimental today. I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I probably read a bit too much, though. Going a full 4 hours was kind of winding, as you probably heard as I got to the, past the halfway point. Well, let's raid someone, and I think I know exactly who I'm gonna raid. Someone who I don't really get opportunity to raid much, and someone whose streams I really enjoy hanging out in. I'm gonna raid you guys into Blue Boxy, who's having a 24-hour stream. Yes, exactly. Good bean. Very comfy streamer. Very, very nice, relaxed, chill vibes. But thank you all for coming. Those who did come, those who did enjoy. Very different today, I know. Let's see. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, I might be continuing the Empire at War thing. That seemed to be well received last time. I don't know. I'm just kind of trying new things, I guess, and hoping they go well. But thank you all for coming. Thank you all for hanging out. Thank you all for. I hope you guys enjoyed the story so far. And if you want the books yourself, they are for sale on Amazon in ebook and physical format. Granted, the ebook is cheaper, so I recommend getting that one. uh, well, that said, much love, many hugs, many kisses, and I'll see you guys soon. See you guys later. Bye bye.